All right, I think you're good to go.
Good morning. Welcome to the Senate Committee on the Administration's COVID response and how it affected businesses. As we had mentioned at our first meeting, we are a Republican committee, but not by choice. The administration's response to our last meeting was to call our efforts, quote, a nakedly political election year stunt. As we had invited them and all Democrats to join us, we find that response in and of itself specious, an abdication of both the administration and the legislature's responsibility. We continue to invite and challenge our Democrat majority friends to join us in our efforts to oversee New Jersey's response to the COVID pandemic over this past year. The loved ones who testified about how they lost their family members certainly did not consider themselves props in an election year stunt. Their pains, their issues, their tears were real. Their demands for transparency and answers are justified, no matter what side of the aisle those answers come from. Today, our committee will look into this administration's effect on our state's economy during the pandemic. As Dr. Smith, an infectious disease doctor and specialist, mentioned at our first meeting, the state was given a 6 to 8 week warning from the onset of the COVID outbreak in Washington state to prepare. However, many of us, including myself, are still willing to give the administration the benefit of the doubt and avoid criticizing those early actions on closing our state's businesses because of the initial fog that this COVID pandemic created. However, we must add that with time and the changing dynamics of this disease, were adjustments to business closures done in a timely fashion? Why with such strict closures of our economy would the Star Ledger recently report that, quote, if New Jersey was a country, we would have the highest COVID per capita death rate in the world? Was science applied to the administrative actions? Why were certain businesses chosen as winners and certain businesses chosen as losers? Who decided that a virus becomes more lethal in a restaurant at 10 p.m. and not at 9:59? Does the science and data justify limiting outdoor gatherings to 50 people, whereas 150 people can gather indoors? We ask so much of some of our businesses so the greater community would be protected. Were they, should they, be compensated? Why were big box stores allowed to stay open and smaller Main Street stores forced to close? What was the thinking, the science, and the data in all of those decisions? Hopefully, by putting a spotlight once again on the pain that these decisions caused, we will be able to eventually get some answers. The panel, which consists of Senators O'Scanlan, Senators Corrado, Senators Tester, and Senators Bucco, as well as Minority Leader and Assemblyman John Bramick and Assemblyman Ned Thomas, will be able to give their opening brief remarks prior to them beginning their line of questioning. However, I would be remiss, we do have Assembly Minority Leader John Bramick with us today. His presence demonstrates the weight and importance that he attaches to this committee. I would like to defer to you, Assemblyman and Minority Leader, if you'd like to make some opening remarks.
Thank you, Senator Panaccia, and I appreciate your leadership on this issue. Let me be 100% clear. During this pandemic and for years to follow, we won't have all the answers or all of the science regarding the effects, how it's transmission, the long-term effects on people. But there is one thing that we can all agree on, that during the past year, we could have had testimony from residents. We basically shut down democracy for 1 year. I don't think anyone ever believed that a state of emergency meant that residents and the public could not voice their opinion. This was the suspension of democracy by this governor. And I understand what a state of emergency is, but what I will never believe is why the governor and the members of the legislature on the Democratic side did not constantly have hearings where restaurant owners small business people, infectious disease experts, people who are experts in this field were denied the opportunity for a public hearing on this. I hope that the future of this state will never see the suspension of democracy again. The question I want all of our witnesses to answer: did you have an opportunity to be heard? We all know there are differences of opinion with respect to the virus, but we should all agree that people should have an opportunity to be heard. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Minority Leader. Now, before we begin, just some housekeeping. Because this is a Zoom meeting, I just want to give our witnesses and our legislative panel just an idea of what we expect. Unless you are actively testifying or answering questions, please keep your microphone muted. If you are not a current panelist, your video will not appear at the meeting. We will bring witnesses into the meeting once it is close to your time to testify. For witnesses who are still waiting to appear, we'll provide directions and updates via the chat box room in Zoom. When you are brought into the main panel, please turn your video on. When you are called on to testify, you may unmute yourself. To the legislative panel, I would ask that all members who wish to speak to be recognized by the chairman. And please direct your questions to the chairman. Thank you all very, very much. And joining us first are Councilor Bob Ferguson, Councilor Catherine Brown, and I understand that you also have your plaintiff with you, Darlene Palais. Very unique perspective as to what you think the state has or has not done in reference to the compensation of some of these shuttered businesses. So, Bob or Catherine, you're up.
I think we'll begin with Darlene, our client, if that's all right with you, Senator.
Good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for inviting me to this meeting. I'm very honored to be here. And I have a little statement to make because it's a little easier for me to read at this point because I tend to get a little emotional when I speak. So I want to be very clear and concise. So I hope you will bear with me. My name is Darlene Palais. Although I've been blessed with many happy, amazing life moments, there are two events in my life that I will never forget for the amount of pain, anguish, fear, devastation, and uncertainty they have caused me and my family. One was the death of my father in 2015 from a rare cancer. He was diagnosed and passed away within 9 months. He was always a healthy man. On March 16, 2020, Governor Phil Murphy and the powers that be closed my 10-year small fitness business for what I was told would be a 2-week shutdown. Month after month passed with continued lockdowns, and approximately 9 months later, my business was dead. While I have my own beliefs on the use of lockdowns, masks, social distancing, and vaccines for this virus, I am a law-abiding citizen of New Jersey, and I did my part to comply with the governor's mandate 100%. I chose to live in Sussex County for a reason. I wanted a simple life in a family-friendly community. I wanted to be surrounded by nature so I could raise my children in a place where I knew they would be safe. It was more affordable for me than other areas of New Jersey. I built my home from the ground up. Every penny of my savings went into my home. And at age 34, I finally succeeded. I felt I finally succeeded in life. It was one of the many blessings I mentioned earlier. A few years later, I met my husband and we started our amazing family. We were older when we met, so we decided to have children right away. He sold his home and moved into mine in Franklin. And my 3 children were born in 2006, 2007, and 2009. I was 40 at the time. We started our American dream. For those of you that know Sussex County, it is a beautiful, picturesque place. However, there are no big corporate industries here and not many good paying jobs within the county to support a family of 5. We are probably best known for our farmlands and parks. Most people have to travel out of the county to make a living or own a business to make a living. In my case, my small business came to me quite by chance. I found kickboxing to be a workout I love to do to get extra baby weight off after 3 consecutive pregnancies, which I mentioned. The workout was called CKO Kickboxing, and it was a franchise. It is an intense class-based fitness routine that yields amazing results based on the intensity of the workout using hanging heavy bags. We researched the business and decided to take a chance. This choice would enable me to work close to home and still be able to raise my children the way I wanted to. I was able to drive them to and from school and pick them up each day and be a hands-on mom, business owner 100% of the time. Many small businesses in Sussex County do not survive, but that was not an option for me. I worked 365 days a year, 7 days a week. The nature of the business still allowed me to be very involved with my children, so the time and sacrifices made were well worth it. My business became more than just a job. I quickly became an integral part of my community, realizing it was key to survival and also because I loved where I lived. The small fitness business I started was and still is now very well known in Sussex County. Through my own fitness and health transformation, I was able to help thousands of people overcome some of their deepest fears and become healthy, vibrant, contributing members and role models in our community. Thousands of women and men not only lost weight, but were able to kick drug habits, get off lifelong medication, participate in amazing physical feats that they never dreamed possible. We were literally a fitness family. My involvement in my business was not just an owner. I immersed myself in the entire process. I did the management, the marketing, the finances, and I also taught 10 to 15 kickboxing classes per week for the last 10 years. I even cleaned the toilets, so to speak. It was my passion, and it was more than just a job. I employed many people over the years that went on to become community leaders, and some became business owners themselves. Community service was key to my survival. I made sure to give back to my community as much as possible. If a local family fell on hard times, CKO Franklin would hold a fundraiser. If a local child became gravely ill, CKO Franklin would hold a fundraiser. 2 families lost their homes to home fires. CKO held a family fundraiser. I organized a community blood drive and gave into countless recreation causes for children. I raised money for nonprofit organizations such as the AMA, Susan G. Komen, the Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy Association. In addition, I volunteered my time to coach my children and started the Hero Boys Run Club in our local elementary school. Everyone across Sussex County knew that they could count on my business to be there when called. When we were shut down, it became a full-time job to save my business. Because we were not allowed to operate at all, we had 0 income. We quickly ate through what we had in reserves to pay off the operating expenses and general business expenses that kept recurring. The confusion, lack of direction, lack of planning in the entire government left me to fend for myself. I did everything I could to save my business. We tried to pivot to online classes, but people did not respond. 3 months later in June, we were given a small glimmer of hope to do outdoor fitness classes. So we built an outdoor facility and tried as best we could. Oftentimes, bad weather made it impossible to keep a set schedule. Unbearable 100-degree heat in July and August also made it very difficult for people to work out without fear of passing out, literally. We could not make enough to make a dent in our rent. I continued to pay my employees that worked and pay utilities and expenses in a space that I was no longer using. The PPP loan for me was not a saving grace. Because I only had part-time employees, I received very little from that program. I used it to pay my employees and used 40% as directed to pay past due rent. The extended lockdown into fall completely destroyed my business. I would cry myself to sleep when I could sleep. I worried about paying our mortgage. Our real estate taxes went up. Our children were home from school. Our general living expenses were barely met. Everything was falling apart. On September 1, the governor gave the go-ahead for gyms to open at 25% with a mask mandate restriction. However, even though I paid my landlord as much as I could bring in during shutdown, he decided to evict me on September 11th. I cannot describe to you the total desperation and complete heartbreak I felt at that time. Forgive me. I have always paid my bills and rent for the last 10 years with no incident. He did not care and offered no concession to work it out. Even though I was served eviction papers, I tried to open for the remainder of my lease to salvage what I could. I spent time and money cleaning the entire space, set out feelers to see if people would even come to class, given the restrictions, and we decided to give it a try and open regardless on October 1. Unfortunately, after about a month, I realized the 25% restriction, mask mandate, and general fear kept people from attending classes. We were losing money. I decided to close for good at the end of October. My landlord shut off the water at the end of November, so even if I had tried to continue to use till the end of my lease, I would have no way of operating my business. Since we have been shut down, I have suffered severe depression, social anxiety, and suffer from other ailments associated with those conditions. Once a very vibrant, active person, I now have become the complete opposite and have gained a lot of weight. The stress of what has happened and what I will face with the upcoming eviction proceedings has caused my hair to fall out. I get severe stress headaches and panic attacks. I often just cry at the drop of the hat. I was once an optimist, a fighter, and an empathetic, giving person to people, and they wanted to be around me. Now I have become angry, pessimistic, and distrustful. I have severe anxiety in large crowds. My life has become living day by day with not much hope for the future that I used to have. I seek justice for what has been done to my family. I followed every rule I was supposed to follow, and I paid dearly for that, while so many have actually benefited from the lockdown. To add insult to injury, our financial situation worsened when my husband lost his job, December 13th. We are approximately $50,000 in debt as a result of losing this business, and I had to start selling equipment to try and alleviate that debt. Our health insurance is in jeopardy. We filed for state assistance and have not heard yet. We are holding on to our family home that we worked so hard for by a thin thread, and I don't know where to go from here. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for all your pain.
Thank you.
Councilman, Counselor would like to speak.
I'll go next. Let me first say thank you to the members of the Senate and Assembly for putting together this important hearing and this important panel. My name is Robert Ferguson, and I, along with my colleague Kate Brown, am Ms. Pallet's attorney and the attorney for her business. Just by way of background, Ms. Pallet came to us through a group that we're involved with called Rescue New Jersey. It was put together, inspired by the efforts of Senator Panaccio and others to obtain some measure of redress for those of our fellow citizens who have been most damaged by the government's response to the COVID-19 crisis. You just heard a very heartbreaking story from Ms. Pallet, and sadly, I suspect that story has been replicated thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of times across the state over the course of the past year. What you heard was that Ms. Pallet complied with the governor's orders and closed her business, and that as a result of that compliance, her business closed permanently and Ms. Pallet lost her livelihood. So to obtain some measure of compensation for the steep price that she paid, we sought to file a petition on her behalf under the New Jersey Civilian Defense and Disaster Control Act. That's the law that Governor Murphy has cited in his executive orders as the basis of his authority to shut down businesses he deemed non-essential and to issue other restrictions. That law gives the governor the power to, quote, commandeer and utilize private property during an emergency, but it guarantees that affected property owners will have a right to receive reasonable compensation for the state's use of their property. Now, my colleague Kate Brown will explain in a moment that the power to commandeer is the only power over private property that the DCA confers on the governor. But suffice it to say for the moment that for a governor's exercise of power over private property to be lawful under the Disaster Control Act, his actions must necessarily be a commandeering or a utilization. If the governor's exercise of power over private property is something else, if it's a regulation, if he says he's not commandeering somebody's property, well, then the governor is exercising a power that has not been conferred upon him by the legislature, and therefore he would be acting unlawfully. So the legislature explicitly contemplated that private property would be used during an emergency, and that's why they gave the governor this commandeering power. But the legislature also determined that affected property owners would be entitled to seek compensation for the losses that they suffered as a result of the government's use of their property during an emergency. And so the Disaster Control Act actually sets up a specific system to compensate these property owners. Section 51 of the Disaster Control Act states, and I quote, "There is hereby established an emergency compensation board in and for each county of the state to be composed of 3 persons appointed by the governor who shall serve at the will and pleasure of the governor and without compensation," close quote. And the law further directs that the
Welcome to Zoom, Bobby froze.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you want to do, but maybe until Bob gets back, perhaps Senator, would that be all right if I went ahead? Okay. I also want to thank you and the members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today. I don't know if you're back, Bob, in any event, but as Bob said, I want to talk about the Disaster Control Act, which is the primary power the governor is using to issue his executive orders, particularly with regard to businesses. And I want to make 3 points. As Bob mentioned, the power that the governor has is described as commandeer and utilize. Now, if you look at those terms, and as Bob said, it's the only power the governor has. If you define those words narrowly, what do? Since it's a conferring power, since those words are describing a power, if you define them narrowly, you narrow the scope of the governor's power. And you're doing this in an Emergency Powers Act. And that's the wrong direction to go. What you really want is to view those words expansively so that the power that the governor has is adequate to meet the needs of a particular emergency. And that's exactly the approach that the Supreme Court has already said you have to take when you're interpreting the Disaster Control Act. And that case is Worthington versus Fawver. The second point I want to make is the relationship between the power, commandeer and utilize, and the obligation to compensate, because the statute says, and I'm just going to quote this part, that the governor is authorized, quote, to commandeer and utilize any personal services and any privately owned property necessary to avoid or protect against any emergency, subject to the future payment of the reasonable value of such services and privately owned property as hereinafter in the act provided. So those words, subject to, make a link between the power and the obligation to compensate, and they're indivisible. And the reason for that is because that link makes this statute constitutional. So why do I say that? This statute is a delegation of the legislature's power, your policymaking power is delegated to the governor in an emergency to use unilaterally. So during an emergency, the governor is unilaterally employing the powers of two branches of government. So now the question is this: since it's your power, your policymaking power, do you have the power to order businesses to close in an emergency without compensating? And the answer I submit to you is no. And that comes from the Constitution, our state constitution. Article 1, Section 20 says, private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. So that's why this statute is crafted to give a power subject to compensation. It keeps it inside the lines of the Constitution. The third point I want to make is a practical point. You've given the governor broad powers over private property during an emergency. This is you're invading private property during an emergency. What secures a high degree of voluntary compliance with a governor's order during an emergency? Compensation. The promise of future reasonable compensation is why you would get a high degree of voluntary compliance. And if you don't get a high degree of voluntary compliance, your power, as broad as it is ineffective. So what makes this power robust is compensation. And Assemblyman Bramnick asked the question of us, did you have the ability to be heard? And the reason this organization, Rescue New Jersey, came together, various disparate people came together, was because people were not being heard. People who were being affected by the statute were not being heard. We hope they will be heard after today, and we thank you again for this opportunity, and we hope we'll be heard in court. Thank you.
Robert, do you want to finish your testimony?
Yes, I'm sorry for that. I was told that I had an unstable connection, and I wish that was the first time I had heard that. But I'll finish up by just saying that, you know, the statute requires that the governor impanel emergency compensation boards in each county. And so what we tried to do on behalf of Ms. Palais, and really for the benefit of all small business owners who are similarly situated, was to file a petition on her behalf with the Emergency Compensation Board in Sussex County. Well, what we learned, unfortunately, in the process of doing our research was that Governor Murphy has not appointed any person to any compensation board in any county in the state. They simply don't exist. There is no body, even though it's provided for and required in the statute, these panels, these compensation boards simply don't exist because the governor has not appointed people to them. So there is nobody to even take and review these petitions. And so what we did was we filed a complaint on September 23rd of last year in the Superior Court. And among other things, we sought a declaration, not that the governor was exercising power improperly, not that the measures he implemented were incorrect or that they were not efficacious or that they went too far, but simply sought a declaration that the governor, having exercised this awesome power, was also obligated to implement all of the guardrails that are set forth in that statute as a condition of his exercise of that power, the chief among them being the obligation to appoint members to these emergency compensation panels to receive petitions from aggrieved property owners. We filed our case. It was transferred to the appellate division. We filed a motion to have the case expedited and accelerated so that Ms. Palais and others like her could obtain this relief promptly. The governor's lawyers vociferously objected to our request to expedite the case. So now we've submitted our briefing to the appellate division. The government's brief is due on Monday, and we look forward to a prompt and favorable decision from the appellate court.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Brown, can you just tell us a little bit about your background? Do you have any experience with constitutional issues in New Jersey?
Are you asking me, Senator?
Yes.
Yes. As a matter of fact, my first job as an attorney, and I've been practicing many decades, was as a deputy attorney general, and I represented, among others, the Department of Corrections, the state police, and the Office of the Attorney General. And I handled civil rights actions day in and day out. Thereafter, in private practice, I also did criminal defense work in federal court on behalf of the defendant. So for over 35 years, I have handled a substantial variety of constitutional claims, and I now try to teach it to a general audience.
Thank you. You had mentioned, Mr. Ferguson, that you're seeking a declaratory judgment. That means you're not seeking any money from the state. You just want the court to agree with your premise that the law is what the law is, and that this patient should be able to go through the mechanisms of getting compensation, correct?
That's absolutely right, Senator. There's a notion in the law called exhaustion of administrative remedies. And what that says is that before you go to court to seek money from a state body or some regulatory agency, the first thing that you're supposed to do is if there is a law that says you have to go to some other non-judicial forum first to seek compensation, that's what you have to do. And that's what the legislature contemplated when they passed this law. The legislature did not want the floodgates opening to the courts after every emergency, in which you would have, scores, hundreds of thousands of aggrieved property owners filing inverse condemnation lawsuits in the Superior Court and bogging down the judicial system. That's why the legislature set up this system so that volunteers, so to speak, would be appointed by the governor in each county to receive these petitions and rule on what sort of compensation would be reasonable. All we're asking for is an opportunity to participate in that process.
To both counselors, are you getting paid?
No.
No, we're handling this matter
almost
pro
like
bono.
I'm a traitor to my profession, but we are doing this work pro bono, and we are delighted to be doing this on behalf of Mrs. Palais. She
Ditto.
merits it.
Thank you. Again, just to reinforce what you said, Catherine, Mrs. Brown, without the subject to compensation, the statute itself, because it would be a taking, would be unconstitutional, correct?
Right. I will put it to you this way. When the power that what was the legislature trying to do right after Pearl Harbor, by the way, this is 1942 or 43 that this statute came in, is to give the governor sufficient power to meet whatever the needs were. So they were giving power up to and including a taking. Yes. And then they were making it indivisible by making it subject to and requiring compensation, both for, as I would say, constitutional and practical reasons.
Okay. I'd imagine that the argument that the state would make is that rests on the word commandeering, that you're not physically taking a land or an object, but quite frankly, the results are the same. If you commandeer by shuttering a business, whether you actually take that business or you shutter it down, as in Mrs. Palais' case, the results are devastating. What's your answer to if the court asks you to read to that definition of commandeering, whether it fits into your mold of the argument that you're making?
Right. Well, I would make 2 points, and the first would be if you say that that the order to close is not commandeering, then what has to be done is you have to identify the lawful authority to issue that order. And every executive order cites the statutory's authorities. And you have to look at those statutory authorities and see, do they authorize it? The only other potential source is an emergency Public Health Powers Act. I always get the title wrong, but that statute is not as broad as the Disaster Control Act. The Disaster Control Act is our fail-safe emergency power law. It's sort of like in case of emergency, break glass. That's what the Disaster Control Act is. The Emergency Public Health Powers Act is more narrow, but and it does allow for taking of property, but it says procure by condemnation or otherwise, and also requires compensation. So you still don't, you'd have to identify an authority, and then there is no authority listed in the executive orders that doesn't require compensation. There are other authorities there, the Veteran Affairs, but that has nothing really to do with this kind of power. So that's your first, that's your first problem. The second problem is why isn't this commandeering if it's an order that is subject to penalty? There are penalties of fine, there's penalties of imprisonment as a disorderly persons offense. So it's a compulsion. You're compelled to do this. So it is commandeering. There is actually an executive order, Executive Order 113, which was issued in early April of 2020, which involved the reallocation of private medical supplies and equipment as needed as the hospitals were filling up. And in that executive order, the governor did follow the Disaster Control Act the way that we have been saying it should be applied to Executive Orders 104 and 107. And you look at these two executive orders. One orders, let's say, the reallocation of a ventilator from Lourdes Hospital up to Morristown Memorial, right? And if that occurs, there will be compensation. But ordering these businesses to close, there's no compensation. That's a distinction without a difference. So those would be my responses.
Okay.
I hope they asked that question.
Just finally, a question for Mr. Ferguson. These edicts, these rulings, executive orders were very broad when it came to the business community. However, there were winners and losers that were chosen. The fact that the administration picked winners and picked losers, does that strengthen the case that you have and the argument that you had that more was asked by some and less by others?
Well, that's absolutely the case. One of the themes of our lawsuit is that it is both tremendously unfair, but also unlawful to ask a small subset of private citizens to pay for these benefits that the governor believes will accrue for the benefit of everybody. And let's be clear about what's happening here. A small group, maybe not so small, but a subset of New Jersey's business owners, mostly small business owners, were asked and compelled by force of law to put their livelihoods on the line. And in some cases, sadly, like in Ms. Palais, they lost their livelihoods. Why did that happen? It happened because the governor determined that shutting down these people's businesses was necessary in order to achieve a benefit for everybody in the state of New Jersey. And our contention is that it is both wrong and unlawful under our state constitution and under the Disaster Control Act, which is the law that the governor is using as the basis of his authority to do this, to ask for those aggrieved citizens to shoulder 100% of this immense burden that has accrued to the benefit of everybody in the state.
Thank you. Now, Senator O'Scanlan, do you have any questions? I guess not. Is there anybody else that has any questions for our witnesses? Well, Mrs. Palais, again, I feel your pain, and I don't want you to think that nobody in government does not feel that pain and empathizes with you. Hopefully, with time, you may be able to get that justly deserved compensation. And Councilors Ferguson and Brown, thank you again for all your efforts and for taking this case on pro bono. Next,
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next up, Ruth Rose. Bruce had chaired a Morris County Chamber of Commerce task force on opening up businesses. Good morning, Bruce. How are you? You have your volume on? Are you muted? Can you hear us?
How many times have I muted myself on Zoom? Good morning, Senator.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. Tell us a little bit about what you did. I understand that Senator Bucco was also part of that committee that was put together. And my questions will be brief, and then we'll give you over to Senator O'Scanlan and Senator Bucco and the rest of the committee if they'd like. Okay.
All right. Let me give a little background about who I am to give a little context and where we did is I'm a scientist. that has been a practitioner in dealing with mostly occupational health and safety issues. I started my career working for an organization many of you know called OSHA here in New Jersey. I was an OSHA inspector, mostly dealing in occupational health issues. I started a company called Emilcott 34 years ago, which is based in Morris County. And our biggest work is dealing with transmission health risk. And we work very closely in the environmental health and safety consulting business with the 3 largest hospital groups here in New Jersey. We also are the arbitrator in New York City between unions and the hotels themselves. Been doing that for 20 years. We work for the largest hotel group in New York City. Our whole aspect is how do you protect not just workers, but how do you protect people? And our company is basically full. We've got pathologists, toxicologists, and industrial hygienists, which are uniquely qualified. I've been teaching N95 respirators for 15, 20 years before anybody had a clue what an N95 was. So we were asked by our group in the Morris County Chamber. I'm on the chamber board. And I also was asked by the chamber and Senator Bucco if we could lead a consensus group to look at this issue of saying, okay, everybody, and I got to say, this was a scary time back in March. I'm not going to tell you that people did the wrong thing in March, but like anything else, once the fear and the emotions go by, now you got to look at it very closely and say, okay, what is the scientific approach that you need to take in order to reopen business? Because it made no sense to shut down industries that could implement procedures to keep their workplace safe and to protect the public. This is my business. We've been doing it all the time. I can tell you many, many stories that are much more difficult than what it would have been if we actually implemented procedures here. The report itself, I could show the report if we could share screens real fast here. This will take 3 minutes here, and this gives everybody at least some understanding. All right, I need to So this report here was put together in the middle of April of last year. We had a group, the 3 of us. Dr. Barsati is a colleague of mine who is an ex-CDC toxicologist, PhD pathologist, principal toxicologist, and I also recruited an executive in the healthcare business because I know a lot about a lot of things in dealing with transmission risk. I didn't know all the terminology, so we wanted an expert in the healthcare business. We had a big group here to support ours. This is a committee, and it was nonpartisan. I'm not a politician. I work for quite a few different groups. We work for the federal government. We work for the Department of Defense. I mean, so it wasn't looked at as being that we needed to be an advocate for any side. And basically what we decided to do is we took what was kind of a chaotic approach, kind of policy by fiat, and developed what we called a transmission risk ranking. And what we did is we simply put risk on industries. And this would have been an industry, for example, that the person that talked about her healthcare, or I should say her fitness industry, she would have gotten a 3. And we looked at gyms, for example. So we ranked them 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1 being the least risk, 4 being the highest risk. And then we put together clear guidance on what, if you happen to be a 1 or a 2, what do you need to do to protect yourself and to protect the public? And so this scorecard goes back to 340 some what they call industry classifications. These are NAICS classifications. And we ranked them, all of them. And we ranked the risk score by whether your public was involved or whether or if the public was not involved, okay? Obviously, if you're working in a manufacturing facility and there's no public coming in, that's one risk area. If you work in a retail operation or in a healthcare or whatever you're involved, that's another type of risk ranking. And so basically for each ranking, and it's a very simple, you had to go over and say, if for example, I'm a moderate, I'm a 2, these are all the things you needed to do. And you needed to get the right personal protective equipment. You had to understand your policies with customers. You had to do your cleaning. You limited your occupancy, not 25%, but necessarily what it specifically dealt with regards to the type of concerns you have, and other things involved. So we outlined the mitigation steps. And so the good news was, and this is the statement that I would have loved to have gotten some traction with back in April, is that 80% of the industries are either minimal or moderate, okay, a 1 or a 2. And a lot of these from the policy were shut down. 15% do have a significant risk, like the gym that we talked about, okay, that would have been considered a 3. Doesn't mean that you shut it down. It means that you take affirmative steps to protect people and do things, frankly, what people are doing today, okay, in a lot of cases. I happen to be in Florida where they're right now that there's a whole steps that's being taken and have been taken to protect people in these type of operations that were not quite as draconian as New Jersey. And then, of course, you have the 5%, which are high risk. And we know what they are, okay? These are the healthcare industries. These are long-term care, nursing homes, people that are dealing with potentially infectious people. And again, my business has been working with these hospitals, so you pretend. So I know how to protect those people. And I surely know how to protect the minimal and low risk folks. So this was the approach. Let me stop sharing here. We basically presented this plan. It was a logical plan, and I'm not sure if it went anywhere at that point. It was out there. We put a lot of effort into it. This was all pro bono work done by our team and by everybody else. And I really believe if you took a more scientific approach, you would have had a lot more activity in the business community, a lot more successes, and not contributed to any increase in disease.
Thank you. I have 3 quick questions before I give you over to Senator O'Scanlan. First, you had mentioned basically your job is workplace control of transmission of diseases in the workplace.
Right.
Okay. Could you tell us, because one of the initial edicts, 110 dated March 25th, closed down nursery schools, children's centers, okay, except for the children of essential workers. Where is the science behind that? Because it seems to me that either those children were being put at risk, or they should have been closed, because if it's risk for one child that is a child of a non-essential worker, it would also be a risk for another child that is an essential worker. Again, is there a science behind that type of executive order?
It's a science that I'm unaware of. And you have policy issues, there's no question. But if you start looking at using specific examples that are essential and take that, not to exclude people, but to learn for them and say, look, and let's go back to grocery stores. You could not shut down grocery stores, okay? And yet you had a workplace that had a high potential transmission risk. And we got a lot of data after the first month or so showing that these can be done safely. So that's what a scientific approach would be, is make an exception, do something that would be potentially a risk that needs to be taken. And this is where, this is not zero risk world that we're in. This is, you're going to accept and then learn from that and apply those good policies to try to accelerate other people coming in. And that's what I think was not done in a lot of cases.
Is there any science to closing a restaurant at 10 o'clock as opposed to 9:59?
No. Somebody like me, 10 o'clock is fine. I don't think I've seen 10 o'clock in a restaurant in a long time, but it's policy by fiat. So there was no science.
Now, I'm sure that either Senator Scanlon or Senator Bucco is going to cover, because your report also spoke about the regional issues that were involved. And I think back in April, Bergen County had 10,000 positive COVID cases and Cape May had 148. Hopefully we can get into why one size did not fit all. So at this point, I'm going to give it to Senator Scanlon.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it. And thank you, Bruce, for being here. This is really valuable testimony, factual, science-based, and I appreciate you making the point that it should be, and that there's a balance here that isn't zero-sum or binary between health and our economy, jobs, and keeping businesses open. That is something that is exactly what we're here to talk about today. I'm going to defer questions to Senator Bucco, who I think invited you here today, but really appreciate it. This is great stuff and exactly what we need to hear. Senator Bucco?
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. It's always good to see you, Bruce.
Good to see you.
It was an interesting process during a really difficult time. And the story that we heard this morning was not uncommon. And we knew as a chamber back then that the amount of businesses that would ultimately be impacted and potentially lost forever would be high as a result of the complete shutdown of our economy. And that was really the reason why the chamber, I went to the chamber to ask them to put this group together. We saw at the beginning of the shutdown, the governor took a one-size-fits-all type of approach. And later on, as we look back, there was discussion about potentially a regional approach based on COVID-19 cases in particular regions. This would have been an industry by industry type of approach based on the risk factors associated with the various industries that we looked at, and we looked at them all. Do you think that we could have opened the economy quicker and safely by using the method that you developed during this process?
Absolutely. We not only took the transmission risk approach and trying to classify potential risks by industry, we also put in front of this the capacity of the healthcare system, because you had two things that you had to balance. Obviously, if you have an overwhelmed healthcare system, that's a crisis, that's a panic that is difficult to have a dialogue with people saying, let's take a risk in trying to get more people in there. And we had that actually in early April, late March. And you found that certain regions, as Senator Panaccio was talking about, Cape May County versus Morris County versus Bergen County versus Hudson County, that you had a complete difference with regards to the capacity or the number of people who were hospitalized, the number of cases. And if you look closely, the number of cases were located in certain cohorts, certain groups that were very predictable. And this is the long-term care groups. It had nothing to do with people who are going to a gym, for example. So if we put a logical approach, and the whole basic premise of occupational health and safety is voluntary compliance. OSHA's been around since 1972, and they require companies to take upon themselves the steps that are needed in order to protect their people and also to protect the public in a lot of cases. So you could have taken these steps. We do it every day. We do it for a living, and the economy could have been open much, much faster. Late April, May, June, we could have had a much more robust opportunity to save people. Maybe not to 100% occupancy. That's part of the process if you look at our mitigation steps. But to have total lockdown, a carpet bombing type approach instead of going, was very distracting and unnecessary.
What has been your experience in working in this industry with the various segments and business owners' response to operating under conditions to keep their employees and and customers safe? I mean, we've heard that, we've seen the administration set the standards, not the other way around. The industry set the standards. Do you have an opinion on that?
I'll give you some examples, okay? One of the things, we work with a lot of engineering firms and construction, developing construction companies. Non-essential construction was shut down in early April. And we ended up developing a plan with validation, with some, and we call it a virus protection program, to basically get construction operating. And they were back operating by end of April. And it was, doesn't mean it was perfect, doesn't mean we didn't have to take a 2x4 over a few, this just to say that's a metaphor, okay? And enforce certain things, but with training and the motivation of businesses. I mean, people want to work, industry wants to move forward. The motivation and the incentives to do the right thing were incredibly high because they saw the opportunity to either be shut down or to work. So we had no problems trying to educate, put people in the right situations, get the right personal protective equipment, and to do it safely. That could be done and has been done. And again, I look at the examples. It's insane to see a large store that has a small grocery store in it, but the whole big store is open. And yet you have Main Street retailing people that couldn't even have curbside deliveries. I mean,
I was going to ask you about that.
It's insane. So
did you have an opinion? At some point, the governor by executive order allowed restaurants to have takeout, curbside takeout, pickup of meals, etc. But at the same time, refused to allow small businesses on our Main Street to do the same. Do you have opinion about that?
Again, we go back to what Senator Panaccio was talking about. Is there science behind it? And the dialogue, again, this is my area of expertise, this is my business. The message that was being given by the governor and by the political policy aspect were being basically dominated by infectious disease physicians. Okay, Dr. Fauci, of course, we know him, epidemiologists, public health officials, all good people. They have they want to protect as many people in the public as possible. They are not practitioners in the field. They are not, they don't work in the workplaces. They don't try to balance risks in economy. They have a whole different, very good perspective. But there was a time when the baton needed to be shifted over from that messaging to the people who are practical, that understand health risk, understand, and we're not just talking chemicals, we're not just talking safety issues. This is also from a biological standpoint. We're in the pharmaceutical businesses are one of our bigger clients, and there's ways to protect people when you start understanding and have an effective approach. And unfortunately, that message never got passed over to the people who are the practitioners.
My last question is, I forwarded a copy of your report, our report, in the county's chamber's report to the governor's office. were you ever contacted by anybody to kind of go over your analysis or your opinion, or to ask, any questions or provide any insight as to, what the administration could change or
Yeah.
contemplate?
The answer is no. Dr. Barsadi and I, Deb Barsadi and I are one of 6 people on a New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection committee on developing guidance for basically air monitoring, local air monitoring when you're dealing with remediating contaminated sites. And so we've been on this committee for 3 years. So it's not that we don't have contact with a lot of state folks involved, but there was no dialogue. There was nothing that I have. And I volunteered begrudgingly, because I knew it would take a lot of time, but I volunteered to say, look, if anybody wants to see what our logic is and help, develop an implementation plan, we surely would do it, but there was none.
Thank you, Bruce. As always, you've been a wealth of knowledge. I thought what the committee put together from the very beginning was a home run and would have saved many, many, many businesses in this state if we had only implemented it, or if the governor had only considered it. And it's a shame that we continue this one-size-fits-all approach. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Bucco, any other follow-ups, Senator O'Scanlan?
Nope, I think you guys covered it really well. And Bruce, really appreciate your input today. Extremely valuable.
Any other questions from any of the panelists? Thank you, Bruce. Really appreciate it. As should have been done, and as we want to do, initially today we applied the law, and now we applied the science. So again, thank you in all your efforts in the past and coming before us today to explain that to us. Thank you. Next up, we have a distinguished panel of commerce and business experts. And I'd like to call on Michelle Sekurka, who's the president of NJBIA. Thank you for joining us today. Mary Lou Harrison, I think former president of New Jersey Restaurant and Hospitality Association, and my good friend John Harmon with the New Jersey African American Chamber of Commerce. The floor is yours. Feel free to tell us a little bit about yourself, your organizations, and what we did should have done in order to make the lives and businesses of your members better.
Thank you so much. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Michelle Sekurka. I'm the president and CEO with the New Jersey Business and Industry Association, and we represent more than 1 million jobs across the state of New Jersey. Over the last year, the NJBIA has fielded tens of thousands of inquiries that are COVID related, with the overwhelming majority seeking guidance on planning and clarification on confusing standards and how those standards, capacity restrictions, mandates, and requirements should be interpreted relative to their individual business or industry. NJBIA and the New Jersey Business Coalition. The New Jersey Business Coalition is comprised of over 100 business and nonprofit leaders that have worked together over the past year to offer solutions, data, and direct input from those we all represent. We presented approximately 25 sets of best practice industry documents, 2 versions of a recovery and reinvention framework document, hosted 3 town halls, and submitted approximately 40 letters to state and federal policymakers on what is needed by way of resources and standards for a responsible reopening. Much of this information can be found at njbia.org/recovery. NJBIA's research over the past year has followed economic trends to decipher patterns and has surveyed our members at intervals to see how they were faring through COVID. Here are some of the relevant and significant data points that I'd like to share. New Jersey's January 2021 unemployment rate was 7.9%, one of the worst rates in the nation. New Jersey saw a 1-year low in weekly unemployment claims filed for the week ending March 6th. However, in that same week, it was reported that nearly 2.1 million individuals had filed an initial unemployment claim in New Jersey since the onset of the pandemic. That means that 44.8% of New Jersey's pre-pandemic civilian labor force has applied for unemployment assistance during the pandemic. Additionally, the number of small businesses open as of March 3rd relative to January of 2020 was down almost 33%. Conditions are particularly worse in the leisure and hospitality industry, where that number is almost 50%. And accordingly, small business revenue as of March 3rd relative to January of 2020 is down 32.4% overall and almost 57% in the leisure and hospitality industry. Now, we also surveyed our members directly. 47% said they will take more than a year or may never recover the profits that they lost during the non-essential business closures. 56% have sought additional or alternative funding sources through federal and state loans and grants, and 59% reduced expenses and overhead in 2020. And the way they did that is through reduced salary, furloughing, and laying off employees. And a very scary statistic here is out of the 72% of respondents who offered health insurance in 2020, 28% said they'd have to discontinue that coverage in 2021 because of the costs associated. Now, our town halls, I said we hosted town halls. Business owners in industries spanning childcare, K-12, education, mental and community health, outdoor recreation, amusements, activities, fitness, dining, workforce, etc., consistently shared the need for more clear-cut guidelines for opening, operating, for thought-out vaccine prioritization, and more consistent logic behind capacity restrictions. On the workforce, of course, a child's ability to be in school or be cared for at a childcare facility is vital to allowing our working parents to not have to choose between going to work or their child raising responsibilities. And while we hear of the ongoing challenges on getting our students back to school, this must be a #1 priority, and there are excellent plans in the industry to do so. I would encourage you to read Dr. David Adderhole's op-ed on behalf of the Garden State Association of Schools, which was found in last week's New Jersey Spotlight News, which raised significant and thoughtful questions for the DOE to resolve in order to get our students back to school. But equally important is childcare facilities. And let me emphasize, this industry had a workforce pre-COVID of approximately 87,000 individuals. But they advise as follows. New Jersey today is an outlier in maintaining restrictions on childcare licenses relative to capacity and adult to child ratios, causing schools to turn families away at this time. Out of 4,200 registered childcare centers, 1,800 have not reopened. That's 42% that are still closed. And for those that are open, revenue is down 50 to 60%. Turning to the general business environment, especially now as we head into the warmer months, there's a planning runway that is needed in order for our businesses and nonprofits to get the maximum benefit and quickest return in their recovery when they can fully reopen. There is always a need for predictability, consistency, and certainty in order for business to plan, but that is even more crucial at a time like this. Spring is the advent of the event season as warm weather draws winter and COVID-fatigued people out of their homes. These annual events drive economic impact for communities and drive tax dollars to our state. And while the governor has announced impending increases to event capacity, this increase falls well short of what is necessary for the event industry to recover. This is despite many venues having enough space to safely host more guests than 25 per person limits for indoor and 50 person limits for outdoor, according to industry leaders. Indoor and outdoor gathering capacity must take usable square footage and event logistics into consideration versus just an arbitrary number. Let me give you an example. According to Michael Chait, president of the Greater Atlantic City Chamber, the Atlantic City Convention Center has more than 480,000 continuous square feet, can easily accommodate more than 25,000 people, but is limited to just 25. Also, casino floors today are open to 50% capacity, but cannot take 26 people from that casino floor and move them to an adjacent ballroom for a meeting. Similar for an outdoor event like the annual air show in Atlantic City, where Chait reports, I'm using 1/3 of a mile of beach, which is open to the public, to plan the air show. Is that space really limited to just 50 people on the day of the event, but thousands of people every other day as beachgoers? An example of economic impact from this one event alone, the 2019 Atlantic City Air Show attracted more than 500,000 people and provided economic impact of $70 million to the regional economy, with an estimated $2.9 million in tax revenue back to the state. With events such as this, we should trust event experts that know how to control density, duration, and egress to determine the appropriate capacity restrictions that meet the safety protocol requirements of social distancing, masking, sanitation, etc. Further, and especially for indoor facilities and their overall business model, not just relative to events, minor incremental changes to increase capacity means adding costs each time a change is made, while those minor increments are doing nothing to change the revenue to the company. What we need is visibility to a full reopening plan so that owners can make a one-time major investment for their workplace and facilities of the future so that they can sustain. The economic pain continues 1 year post-COVID. Our Main Street businesses continue to struggle with rent payments, with many small business owners telling us they still have to use personal savings to make these payments. Hiring is sporadic and inconsistent, causing continued unemployment insurance challenges. And with unemployment and deflated revenue, food insecurity plagues our communities like never before. At one of our town halls, Fulfill CEO Kim Guadagno advised of a 40% increase in need, with 3.2 million more meals given out in the last 10 months than in the year before. Businesses are thankful for the investments made by the EDA and the federal PPP program. In fact, EDA is to be commended for getting money out to New Jersey businesses as swiftly as possible. However, there will never be enough government money to continue to throw lifelines to our businesses. Investment now must be spent on long-term solutions, the business models of the future, and getting people back to work ASAP. This is how money in the 2022 fiscal budget should be spent on business, as well as money coming through New Jersey through the federal rescue package. We have ideas on how to invest that money for long-term economic stability, such as replenishing the UI fund and for workforce and business grants. We welcome the opportunity to share those thoughts in detail at a more appropriate time. We can reopen now and we can do it safely. All along, we have asked that when a business can check the safety boxes to let them open. The health, safety, and welfare of the workforce is tantamount, as well as that of their clients, customers, and vendors. If data determines dates and public health drives economic health, as the governor says, then we should be there. We see daily that hospital capacity has remained within pre-COVID ranges. Isn't that the key metric we should be watching? The governor has stated that we will be fully open when we reach a goal of 70% of adult vaccination. We know that the vaccine is a significant mitigant. It is a mitigant to becoming gravely ill from COVID, but as we have been told, it is not meant to mean total immunity from potentially contracting COVID. We all hope we attain the governor's goal, but we have asked, what if? What if we do not attain that as a state that saw anti-vax rallies in the winter 2019, just before COVID arrived? What is the alternative plan to a full reopening? We must have better visibility to what success looks like versus a constant moving of the goalpost. And yes, the goalposts have continued to move many times. And you'll recall one example, July 4 weekend, when restaurants were told they could open, only to be told otherwise with 24 hours of opening, having expended personal dollars on food, beverages, etc. Again, we suggest it's the continued checking of the safety boxes, along with the continued ramp up of the vaccination process, a process, by the way, that should also afford the opportunity for closed pod vaccines when supply becomes available to support this. Getting the workforce vaccinated quickly requires making the vaccine more accessible to them, and this can be done at their work sites safely. We thank the legislature for the bipartisan solutions that you have brought forth to assist in the reopening of the state. We ask for more. We need your continued help now. We need your action now, and we stand ready to work with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Mary Lou, before we go to you, I just want to apologize to Anthony Russo. I was not told that he was going to be part of this panel representing the Commerce and Industry Association of New Jersey. My apologies. It's actually my staff that goofed up. But anyway, then we'll go to John, and then Anthony, you could finish up before we start answering some questions from the panel. Thank you.
Senator, and I actually am still with the association for another week, so I'm still current. But still be in the industry, just in a different position. So I'm sure I will still see you all again. So thank you so much for having me on. I don't need to tell you how much this has devastated the hospitality industry. Probably other than healthcare, we are the most impacted. And I want to thank my colleague, Michelle, because BIA is always so great. I was just listening to all the stats, and I appreciate so much the intelligence that she brings. So 1 year ago today, or not 1 year ago today, but 1 year ago, when our state closed due to the COVID-19 virus, so did the hospitality industry. 85% of the 350,000 employees, and we are the state's largest employer, were either furloughed or laid off. With only takeout and delivery an option, 70% of our restaurants couldn't operate. What started out as a public health crisis is now an economic crisis, affecting hospitality businesses, their employees, and all the community programs that our restaurants support in their towns. Only 30% of our restaurant employees are now back to work as we speak. Last year, closing our state was the correct thing to do. There was so much unknown about the virus, and public health had to be the priority. But we learned more. it became apparent that restaurants were not the super spreaders that so many wanted us to believe. This delay and the belief that our industry would further spread the virus prevented a fair return to business and would have reduced the negative impact on our industry and our employees. Recently, there was a heartbreaking story in the media about a young girl who was doing school via Zoom. She broke down crying, and when her teacher asked her what was wrong, it became apparent that she had not eaten in a couple days. Unfortunately, her mother was an out-of-work restaurant employee. And thankfully, to fulfill, and Kim Guadagno, they went in with, as they always do, and helped feed a community. These are the unintended consequences that are happening around the state. Unfortunately, New Jersey has seen some of the highest COVID numbers, but yet we still have the strictest restrictions, while other states, even neighboring states in the Northeast, are more open, but yet their COVID numbers are much lower than ours. Why is that? Perhaps because we push people into gathering into private settings where sanitation is not the same as a restaurant. In fact, our members are following even more enhanced sanitation with our safe dining guide, which we did submit to the governor's office. We are over a year into this shutdown and will continue to see our industry devastated. Governor Murphy promised to follow the science, and we all supported that decision. But now the numbers are significantly better, vaccines are rolling out, but yet we are still one of the most restricted states in the country. And why do we think that following New York is a good idea, where their numbers are even worse than ours? If I could go back in time, we should have opened at 25% in July and not September. We were disappointed that the governor did not sign that $100 million CARES funding bill that had overwhelming support in the legislature, and I want to thank every member of the legislature for supporting that. I hope the timing of that cash infusion would have been a lifesaver. I hope our industry sees more grants from the EDA as more money comes from the federal government. And more importantly, I wish that our governor would have met with our industry like he did with so many other groups and organizations. The governor communicated with me, but I was baffled as to why he would not meet with our members. I know he felt sympathy for our industry, but direct communication would have helped so much. With the knowledge my members have about their business, we could have been a resource and provided solutions. When decisions about an entire industry are being made, it is critical to have their input. 4 or 5 people making broad sweeping decisions in a silo is not good governing. And I am concerned that the balance of power in New Jersey is lost. Thank you.
John? John, you're muted. Unmute yourself, please.
Got it. Is that better?
I hear you.
Can you hear me now? Senator Ignacio and others, thank you for the opportunity to chat. And you all have been very supportive of the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey over the years, and we really appreciate it. This is a very important discussion today, and my hope is that we will not have this situation, future reoccurrence of this situation, but what we are exchanging here today and what we've learned collectively as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is my hope that we would all have a reset in the future and be better prepared to deal with something like this should it occur in the future. But as we look at the Black community in New Jersey, it's about 1.2 Black residents in the state. And many of you know we have the highest poverty, the highest unemployment, low median income. Our net worth is about $5,900 versus whites somewhere around $309,000. So you can just imagine how devastating this COVID-19 impact from a health perspective, given the systemic underlying health conditions, high blood pressure, heart disease, and diabetes that many of my brothers and sisters unfortunately have as a part of their makeup. So this whole situation has been devastating. It's projected over 40% of Black businesses will not open, and many of them have been closed and will remain closed. So that is a very unfortunate set of circumstances. Michelle, Sekurka, and Mary Lou have really laid out some real important information as it relates to what we should have done, what we could have done, and how we should try to do better going forward. And I have nothing but respect for these two leaders in the organizations they represent. But there's some legislation that has been pending for forever. And it's mind-boggling to me as I articulate the economic standing of Blacks in terms of their low disposable income, that we have an insurance discrimination bill, A1657, that has not gotten moved, it has not gotten done, where we have proxies like education, credit score, as you know, as proxies in terms of auto insurance. Again, that would give some immediate relief to many households if they could get some reduction in their auto insurance. And Senator Panaccio's bill that speaks to just reporting publicly of public spend. I think these are things that we still should address, notwithstanding the other stuff we're trying to deal with as it relates to this COVID-19. Also, the expansion of project labor agreements in the state of New Jersey. We had asked for a threshold to give many businesses exemption up to a certain level so they could pay prevailing wage but not have to be signatories to unions. I just think it's fair. It's taxpayer money, so this is taxation without representation. There's a preference, clear preference given to certain groups here in the state, whereas minorities and women have to do a disparity study. I would hope that even in this environment, that these types of discussion would take some form of a priority. The recent legislation or initiative around the economic incentives from the EDA and the government, so I think that's a great move. Should it have been done a lot earlier? Absolutely. But I want to close with this. As you all look at bills in the coming days, weeks, and even in the future, please take note to the statistics that I just articulated about the 13–14% of Black people in the state. We are in pretty bad shape. And so when we're looking at these economic policies, we should be a little more intentional and focus on the bottom up to get people in a better place. I do salute the many food banks across the state for responding to the call and feeding many households. As we know, many kids of color go to school every day hungry. So in New Jersey, one of the wealthiest states in the country, we have to do a better job. So I'll yield back with that. This recent budget, I think, I'll just say this, the pension payment, I think is important. I think it's a big number. I think some money could be distributed in other areas as well. So that's probably, that's about all I got to say. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to respond to them. But I just thank you for the opportunity to just talk, participate today.
Thank you, Mr. Harmon. Mr. Russo?
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some feedback. Again, Tony Russo with the Commerce and Industry Association of New Jersey. If you don't know anything about us, we were created in 1927. We have an office up here in Rochelle Park, one in Trenton. We represent about 900 businesses from virtually every business sector. And I just want to echo again, and John, to your point, I have a lot of respect for John, Mary Lou, Michelle, Tom Bracken, and a lot of the other business groups. I'll start with, again, what happened from last March to now, and just kind of keep my comments informal. And I don't really want to repeat a lot of the things that were said. Again, I agree with it. But I'll start with, when we decided to make certain businesses essential and non-essential. I think if there's any lessons learned here is that all businesses are essential. I can't tell you how many phone calls I took from members saying, why am I not essential? My paycheck, my workers are important to me, and yet I'm restricted. The other thing that wasn't appreciated, and we tried to, over time, try to appreciate it, is that a lot of our businesses are interconnected, right? So Mary Lou, your industry was hit hard right off the bat, but a lot of our companies supported your industry. So they hurt economically. And I'll share a story about a manufacturer. You know, they were essential. They stayed employed, but when one of their retail clients stopped, their businesses were hurt. So right off the bat, he lost 20% of his business. And so there needs to be appreciation that all the businesses are interrelated. There's a supply chain, and that, you know, if this were to happen again, which I hope it doesn't, you know, we have to start with all businesses are essential. So, you know, that's one of the things. The other thing that confused a lot of our members, it was really just the sheer number of executive orders that have been issued since last March. I think the count is now 129, all very important, you know, but the two that really kind of surfaced to the top that I wanted to mention today is Executive Order 107 and Executive Order 192. 107, basically remote workforce, work from home, you know, that's still in play. That confuses a lot of our members. I just wrapped up an HR form for our members where we're still being asked, and we're actually surveying our members as far as there's a lot of uncertainty. When am I going to bring my employees back to work? And again, just to be candid, this is going to be a business decision that each sector is going to have to make. And I could tell you that we're probably not going to see, you know, a return to all in-office work. I think the hybrid model is going to be around for a while. I think if you could allow your employees to work from home, great. If you can't, that's fine too. I just think at some point, and this is what I think is important, and I know that it's probably still too early, at some point the governor has to lift the emergency order, you know, that public emergency. At some point we have to declare the pandemic over when it's safe to do so, because once we lift that ambiguity, then there's that confidence, right? The businesses gain that confidence again to do work with each other. You know, one of the things that we lobbied for early on was liability protection. And again, I want to be clear, we're not trying to protect the nefarious employer that doesn't care about their employees, but the ones that I've talked to, you know, they're all protecting their employees. That's their number one resource. If their employees aren't productive or healthy, then they're not healthy and they're not productive. And so one of the things that we asked for early on was this liability protection. And I understand, Senator Panaccio, that the state of Florida just today announced that they introduced legislation for liability protection. I think that's needed. The other thing that we learned, and if you go back to late spring, following the CDC, following what was going on, I think everybody learned right away, maybe 3 months into the pandemic, that wearing a mask, social distancing, applying common sense, washing, sanitizing, these were things that companies started to do on their own once the CDC guidance came out. So the one ask was, well, why can't we just open up business and apply these models a lot earlier? And again, you had to look at each sector that went through, and it was different. So, you know, I'll end with this, that, you know, I think it's important, again, to lift the order when it's safe to do so, bring that confidence, that certainty back to businesses, you know, protect the good players, and obviously go after the bad players. But I think it's important that at some point we get back to business as normal. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you to all the witnesses. I know we had some questions from our legislative panel. Senator Scanlon?
Thank you, Senator Panaccio. And thank you to all four of you. Really appreciate your input here today. Throughout this, and I've spoken to many of you and heard from each of you at various times over this past year with some of the same themes that we heard today, just with more clarity today and more force. Throughout, it was my experience that the governor repeated over and over again that public health is economic health. When he was constraining the economy, perhaps unnecessarily, and we've all seen it now, as if to say that business is irrelevant and the economy is sacrificable to whatever level in order to go to the nth degree regarding COVID, while ignoring the opposite. And we've said this now since early April, that the opposite is true as well. Economic health is also public health. And Michelle, you hit on an aspect of that I hadn't thought of until you mentioned it today, that businesses are, and I'd like you to expand on it just for a moment. What percentage of businesses did you hear from specifically are forgoing health insurance now or eliminating it because of the economic strain?
Yeah, it is in our survey, 72% of those surveyed, out of those 72%, 28% of the 72% said they'll have to discontinue coverage in 2021.
Astounding. And then you get into the other negative impacts. We have all spent time talking to people, business owners in tears, not saying just open with reckless abandon, but simply saying follow the science, be dynamic, communicate to people. And I know each of you representing business groups, we all heard this from business people. If only the governor's messaging would suggest that he was somewhat optimistic, would suggest that he had a priority of getting businesses open rather than keeping them closed. And that went on month after month. And I understand the first 4 or 5 weeks of this, that it seemed like the right decision because no one knew what was going on. But we very, very quickly started to talk about reopening, started to talk about the science, started to experience and build data as we went that showed that we could open up more. We also saw other states that moved faster than we did, were more dynamic, were more inclusive of industry people in their decision making. Michelle, you also mentioned the frustrating, nonsensical, contradictory rules that were in place, and the lack of some sort of communicated, overarching plan going forward with some level of optimism. It's as if the governor didn't trust us to understand if things change, we wouldn't be able to go down that path. I think it was several of your members that communicated this to me. Have you heard the same thing?
So I want to say that we offered up solutions through the Business Coalition's Recovery and Reinvention Framework document, 2 versions. You know, the first version, obviously very early on when we were still in a crisis, right? But as things then continued, as the numbers start to level out, and as we said, if public health dictates economic health, right? What should have happened was the public health numbers being in our favor means those numbers are coming down in terms of hospitalization or transmission, et cetera. At the same time, the economic numbers should have been coming up. But what happened was this kept happening on the public health side, and we got stuck here, really got stuck here on the economic side. And we got stuck in like what we called at the time a big pause button. And we said, why are we stuck in this big pause button? Because these numbers keep coming down and this should be an equilibrium. And that's when we started to get concerned. And so the Recovery and Reinvention Framework document talked specifically about how to safely and responsibly reopen, that when you check those safety boxes, which are now the mandates that business must do in order to be open, when you do those things, according to all the experts at OSHA and CDC and WHO, we should be safe to transact business. And we don't, as we know, we don't see, as Mary Lou mentioned, you know, we don't hear a lot about contact tracing anymore. We're not seeing, though, from business transactions, you know, any spikes. We see them in social settings, not in business settings. And so I encourage you to take a look at the framework documents. We also talked about, we presented a reopening plan that went by region as well. And we said, especially when the governor talked about opening schools by region, we said, wait, if you have red, yellow, and green for schools by region, why not business? And it was like, well, because the schools, it's one community in an area, they're closer, but business people can, you know, drive across the state. We said, but teachers travel to work for school. They don't necessarily live right in the community, right? And we recognize we're a small state, but we can still, the best place for things to happen is in community, give communities the ability to rebuild from the community on out. And if you can check the boxes, we should be able to be more open than we are today.
Exactly right. We all made that case. You know, Connecticut had regions and different standards for business reopening in various areas. Last time I checked, they were a small state. And last time I checked, almost all of their metrics were as good or better than ours. And virtually every other state moved faster with certainly restaurant reopening. Mary Lou, I'm going to chat with you in a second. But virtually every other state moved faster, more aggressively to preserve the hospitality industry and business in general with no negative health impact. We've seen that now for months and months. And my office has documented, we published charts that showed all these metrics unemployment rates, negative impacts on budgets, business closures, and health metrics. Virtually every other state has moved faster than we have, again, with no negative health impact. Nobody here, none of you, myself, none of the senators on this panel have advocated throwing the doors open and to hell with public health. What we're saying is, what we need to do is balance our concerns and make sure we exploit the progress we've made in our health metrics, and as quickly as possible, take advantage and preserve the public health that comes with economic health by getting our economy open more. Mary Lou, I really appreciate your presentation today. You and I have both been communicating regularly with dozens of restaurants. We're going to hear from some of them in a moment. But what was your attitude? What was the attitude that you experienced when you brought your concerns to the administration, that they weren't listening to enough experts, and that they ought to care about this industry? What did you hear back?
You know, I will say that the phone calls were always returned and they heard me, but I don't know if they were truly listening. It seemed as though it was, yes, thank you for the information, you know, have a nice day. Or I got pushback, quite frankly, you know, from some that, you know, really kind of, how should I say, just, you know, didn't think that I was being responsible and advocating to opening up restaurants. And, you know, I needed to inform them that I work for the restaurants. That's who, you know, I represent. And, you know, when we tried to make the arguments about the sanitation protocols, I mean, I guarantee you restaurants have, maybe other than hospitals, and I don't even know, maybe even more than hospitals, we have the highest sanitation protocols in our restaurants and hotels. I mean, what we have to go through. And, you know, back to my original testimony, you know, trying to educate them about, you know, walk them through. And I wish they would have listened. I wish they would have gotten on the phone with some of our restaurants so we could have walked them through the safe dining plan, what we do with ServSafe, how we clean our restaurants, and what we were willing to do. You know, we wanted to be part of a decision-making process, but it was just basically, you know, we were said, thank you, but no thank you.
I experienced several times the attitude that it was almost like with blinders on regarding restaurant reopenings, that it's a batch of whiny, spoiled rich people who want to dine out that would be served by reopening restaurants. That's not the case, is it?
No, I mean, we're the state's largest private sector employer, and our restaurants and hotels employ from a 7 to 9 mile radius. So they truly hire from within their community. So we're talking about the livelihoods of 350,000 New Jerseyans who rely on that restaurant or a hotel being open. And the reason probably why the unemployment numbers are still so high in our state is because our restaurants are not, you know, able to be reopened. I mean, today we're going to 50%, but even still with 6 feet, you know, we're not going to be able to get much past that. So it's, what our restaurants do for their communities are, you know, I guarantee every single one of you have probably asked a restaurant for a donation to your charity that you've been involved with, PTA, Tricky Trays, you know, the Cancer Society walks, your son's Little League team, whichever. And you never hear no. And when Hurricane Sandy hit, who was the first responders? When even this happened, restaurants who had nothing were still trying to they were showing up at hospitals and nursing homes, feeding the essential workers, the nurses and the doctors. That's what our restaurants do. This is not just about people going out to eat. This is about a community, and it is about the employees. And that is their biggest concern right now, is how are their employees going to survive?
It didn't appear to me as if that was as if an understanding of this industry, the employment, the negative health impacts of so severely curtailing it, when all the evidence showed we could save it and save more of it, is really tragic. There's no way to go back and put that toothpaste back in the tube. Going forward, we can do more, but a lot of that damage is done. Thank you guys very much for being here. I'll stop my questions right there.
No, I think just the last point I want to say is that at the end of the day, it is the governor's decision, right? He's the governor. Okay. But I don't understand when you have people across the state, and in New Jersey, we're pretty smart people. We have a lot of intelligence, a lot of knowledge. We have resources. Why you don't bring people to provide that and be able to provide solutions? Because I think we could have been so much further along if we brought John, Harmon's members in, and Michelle's members, and Anthony's members in, and my members in. We would be so much further along in this process.
I agree completely. And look, the governor did at April 28th with much fanfare announce a blue ribbon panel of industry experts in a number of different categories, I think half dozen. And what we've heard is you guys were chosen to serve on some of those. What we've heard is just about nothing, no input. And we saw just last week quotes from people that served on these committees that from the start, we didn't have much input. It's as if it turned in the governor's office simply asking us for support to support what they were doing. And his decision-making process has gotten more and more insular as we've gone on. And it appears as if only 3 or 4 people are making the decisions in a silo. That is tragic that we did not exploit in a dynamic way the industry expertise that could help save these businesses and much more of our economy. That's a tragic, tragic mistake that was made. Thank you, Senator Panaccio.
Thank you, Senator Scanlon. I understand, Senator Bucco, you have a question?
Yes, just briefly. First, to our panelists from the business and industry and hospitality communities, thank you for all that you do. You are the ones that we go to when we have questions about policy and legislation that's going to impact the economy. And your expertise has been invaluable, at least to me, in terms of guidance and support in those areas. I just have a question, and perhaps somebody may have said it and I missed it, but do we know, maybe Michelle or Mary Lou, in the hospitality industry or in the economy in general, how many businesses have shut their doors forever as a result of this COVID crisis?
I mean, I can say for the, so in the hospitality or the restaurant sector, we're anticipating, and the reason why I say anticipating, because we have a lot of seasonal businesses, so we're not sure if they're going to reopen or not. We'll know more probably April, when more business licenses and ABC licenses, the renewals, but probably close between 35 and 37%.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'll just add, as I noted in my testimony, 32% less businesses, small businesses in the state of New Jersey than January 2020. So the big question is, will any of those come back? But that's where we stand today. A third of our businesses less than we were January of 2020.
Incredible. We heard Bruce Groves before talk about the science behind reopening the economy and the work that he did with the Chamber, Morris County Chamber. If my recollection is correct, I think the hospitality industry was risk level 3, which would have meant an initial opening back in April of 50%. And then based on the experience of that opening, increased, as Bruce indicated, based on the experience and whether or not there was any impact on the size of the opening, et cetera, and the protocols that had to be followed. If the industry would have allowed 50% back then, instead of keeping them shut down for as long as they did, and then the slow rollout as we've seen, would that have had an impact?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think, and again, I wanted to touch on something else that you had said. We're looking at curve, right? And we had that other spike, and the other spikes came after the holiday season, where our restaurants weren't having people in there, right? So people were going to people's homes. That was what contributed to our second spike in December and January. Was not, it was from Thanksgiving and Christmas. It was not because people were going to, instead of having them go, 8, 10 people in a nice restaurant, sit there for an hour and a half, have their meal and then go home. No, you had people going into people's homes. I think a lot of the, so by opening up in April, you would have had more people back to work, and you potentially could have reduced the spread because you would have had people spread out more and not just congregating, because we are social, and so, people try to stay home for as long as possible, but it's in our innate nature to congregate and be together. So instead, we went to people's homes instead of, a safe sanitary environment. So it would have contributed, the businesses would have been better off, the employees, we would have had people back to work, and potentially it could have been healthier for our society.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, that was part of the argument that Senator O'Scanlan and I used when we began saying that it just made absolutely no sense to keep the bars closed at 10 o'clock for the Super Bowl, and essentially force people, not to go out to restaurants and bars to watch the game, but to send them into huge gatherings at individual homes. And I think as a result of the governor hearing that argument, I think that was one time that at least, it was just common sense that forced him into that decision. And I think that's the reason why we didn't see the uptick like we did after the holidays back in Thanksgiving and Christmas. So
yeah,
thank
it's the
you.
same thing with bar seating, because you have more distance between, you have a bar, you have your seat, you have the bar, you have the speed rack, you have the bartender. So you're significantly further from somebody when you sit at a bar than if someone comes over to your table to take your order. So, even if you had done, 6 feet between, say, whoever came together, eliminating bar seating is not really doing anything. It's not real, and our members were willing to jump through hoops, put plexiglass up, do whatever they could just to get reopened.
And by the way, they have, and they've done a great job of it. I've spent a lot of time out supporting the industry, and everywhere that I've gone, no matter what time I've been there, you see the work that goes on, the deep cleaning, the distancing, the enforcement of the masks requirement. They do go above and beyond. And I think the reason they do is because, number one, they don't want their customers to get sick, and they don't want their employees to get sick. Because if either one of those things happen, they can't do business. And so, I think there needs to be a little bit more faith placed into industry rather than placed in the government regulation. And I think that set the standards and then just let them go. Thank you.
I do have a comment if you get a chance.
Anything else, Senator Bramlett?
Thanks.
Well, Senator, when you have a chance.
Oh, thank you. When we started this hearing, I discussed the fact there was a suspension of democracy. I think this legislature needs to pass legislation that if there is going to be one person rule in a state of emergency, that this governor, whoever that governor might be, has to hear from those people affected. And I ask all four of the witnesses just one simple question. How much opportunity did this governor give you to have your members speak before this governor at a hearing? And Zoom is a very viable way to speak to the governor. I just want to know how many opportunities, not you through his executive branch, how many opportunities did the public or your members have an opportunity to speak to this governor?
Well, I'll begin, if that's okay. I will say that the committees that were set up as part of the restart, we did have. I'm not
asking. I'm a lawyer. I'm a trial lawyer, so I would appreciate if all of you would answer the question. Okay. Because
absolutely, John. Assemblyman.
Members, not his so-called designate.
I gotcha. No, I gotcha. The reason why the New Jersey Business Coalition hosted town halls was because there was not the opportunity for the business community to be heard. So the business community didn't have the opportunity to be heard. That's why we did it. Okay. So the answer is we didn't.
Yeah, what happens is one of the things the legislature does, okay, I appreciate all of the testimony, but at the end of the day, we want solutions. And if a governor does not hear from the people for 1 year, and the legislature doesn't hear from the people, and once again, none of us are experts on the science here. We don't know whether it's 6 feet or 8 feet or 3 feet, or we're not going to know for years. But we do know that democracy demands an opportunity for people to be heard. I just want to know how many opportunities in the last year, and I know, Mary Lou, you mentioned something about the governor was sympathetic, okay? You mentioned, yeah, well, I get that because when I meet with him, he's sympathetic too. But that's not the question. The question is, do the people have an opportunity to be heard during a state of emergency where democracy has been shut down? I just want to know how many times that opportunity was provided to your members directly, like this hearing's doing for your members. 1, 2, 0.
So Assemblyman, yeah, I was going to say, it came through the groups. It came through the groups. There was no direct that I'm aware of.
I'm not asking about your groups. How many times did the governor hear directly from your members? That's the question.
Right, I'm aware of it.
Your duty is to answer the question.
Yeah.
I'll answer the question. So we did request through his office, but we were denied the request.
Once again, maybe ask about requests. How many?
I know, I was saying, so we didn't. It was 0.
That's all I need to know. Because if we're going to suspend democracy, right? And then everyone in the legislature, everyone on the Democratic side and the Republican side needs to join together and have, we need legislation. If you're going to suspend democracy, let the people speak. And in my judgment, once again, we will never know the science, but we will always want transparency in this government. And that's the most serious offense, I think, that has been committed during this period of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Assemblyman, this John Harmon, just let me say this. Now, I hear your question loud and clear. And I can say that there's been occasions where I've communicated with the governor directly as it relates to these issues on behalf of our members. But to your point, I think there should have been a greater coalescence of dialogue in the public domain as it relates to these issues. And so I agree. And I think this conversation today could be of great value going forward. You know, the irony is we've all learned from this and we've all come short in terms of meeting individual expectations and or collective expectations as it relates to the state as a whole. But my concern is, how do we advance this conversation today in a more meaningful way to get the governor and his representatives at the table so that we all leave in a better place as New Jerseyans? That's kind of where I'm coming from.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting. Legislation where the people can always be heard.
All right, thank you, Assemblyman. Now, I know we have a question from Senator Tester and Assemblyman Thompson. We'll take those two final questions, and then we'll wrap it up because I know we have quite a number of people that want to testify after this group. Senator Tester?
Thank you, Senator Panaccio. And if I may, I'd like some introductory remarks, if possible.
Sure.
First and foremost, I would like to thank Senator Panaccio and Senator O'Scanlan for hosting today's independent hearing on small businesses. I want to be very clear. The Murphy administration has failed our small businesses, from limiting restaurants and bars from operating at a suitable capacity to refusing to allocate more funding to save our struggling businesses throughout the Garden State. The Murphy administration picked winners and losers by dividing our businesses into what they deemed essential versus non-essential. Let me be crystal clear. All of the businesses in the state of New Jersey are essential. That's why Senator O'Scanlan and I have co-sponsored bipartisan legislation that would help small businesses to get back on their feet. This legislation would allocate $300 million in grants and loans to our struggling businesses to stay afloat. While more than 30% of our businesses were closing their doors and more than 1 million people were losing their jobs in the private sector, Governor Murphy used $600 million of the CARES Act money to pay the salaries of existing state employees, many of whom were not showing up to work each and every day. These weren't new employees hired to help with COVID-19. These were employees who have been on the state's workforce for years. During the COVID-19 era and the state shutdown, Governor Murphy has placed reopening our economy on the back burner. Last spring, while Cape May County accounted for less than 2% of all COVID cases in the entire state, we were still under complete shutdown. Governor Murphy said he was taking a surgical approach to the state. Well, in surgery, you use a scalpel, not an axe or a meat cleaver. The Cape May County Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Cape May County, then called the Board of Chosen Freeholders, now the Board of Commissioners, created a safe and reasonable plan that would protect our community. The plan was so good, it was adopted by Atlantic County and received the stamp of approval in a bipartisan fashion from Senate President Steve Sweeney. However, that plan has languished on the governor's desk, and Cape May County was provided scraps during the summer season, and our local economy has suffered ill effects that will be long lasting. Now, more than a full year later, it's well past time to fully open our economy and get New Jersey back to business. So my question is for Mary Lou, for Michelle, for John. We were told by Governor Murphy we were all in this together. It certainly doesn't appear that all of New Jersey was all in this together. We were also told that the data would drive the dates. I'm going to ask each and every one of you, and I'm going to sort of borrow Assemblyman Bramnick's mantra. Just please answer this question. Were you provided the data that would drive the dates that New Jersey could reopen?
No.
No. So again, and this was all, again, through the coalition. These are the exact things, Senator, that we asked for. And we said it's one thing to report numbers every day. It's another thing to tell us where the goalpost is. And we asked repeatedly, are we at the 5-yard line or are we in enemy territory? And then the goalpost would continue to move. And that was the challenge. That's what continues to be the challenge today when we ask for predictability and a runway in order to plan. That's exactly what we need right now, is we need a comprehensive plan that gives us that visibility to what the metrics are in order to ensure that New Jersey business can come back full throttle.
Thank you for that, Michelle, because that was exactly the plan that the Cape May County, then the Board of Chosen Freeholders, now the Board of Commissioners, came up with. It was a slow ramping up plan that actually was based on science. And like I said, it was adopted by the Atlantic County Board of Chosen Freeholders and given the stamp of approval by State Senate President Sweeney. And again, it's languished on the desk. You know, I don't mean to be too harsh here, but this has not been a surgical approach. It has not been one that has followed any data that we've been provided with. And, you know, myself, Senator Bucco, and Assembly Leader Bramnick, you know, we're all attorneys, and in the law, we have this term called arbitrary and capricious. It certainly appears to me that the Murphy administration has followed the reopening plan for the state of New Jersey in a completely arbitrary and capricious manner. Would you folks agree with that? Oh, and Senator Corrado, I apologize. I left you out of that, and that was not meant as any disrespect. I apologize. But Michelle, Mary Lou, Anthony.
We, again, as I said, the numbers, it's a challenge to wait for a report every day to hear the numbers and have a tactical plan versus a strategic plan. Okay. And when we're playing, you know, block and tackle versus what's the long game here. Yes, we don't know what success looks like, as I said earlier. And so have we seen, I gave you examples earlier of what could be interpreted as arbitrary. And, you know, that word can have perception in ways that we don't want it to have. But certainly when you look at logistically, or what makes common sense at times, right? As I said, you can have 50% of capacity in a casino, but you can't take 26 people have a convention-like meeting, and the money that is with that, right? We saw examples like that. And look, one size, you know, just doesn't fit all. We've tried very hard to bring a lot of examples to the table and seek interpretation and interpret EOs in a more not liberal to be irresponsible, but liberal in order to get as many opportunities as possible for business to operate responsibly within those EOs. But it does mean oftentimes that we have to go and seek permission to make sure that these businesses are operating according to an EO, because it's just not clear many times for them.
Yeah, I mean, Senator, you know, we were asking for that certainty. That was what our businesses need. I mean, they need to plan, right? And so you can't plan when it's uncertain, when you're not sure. when the next executive order would come out or the capacities would increase. So that certainty that you talk about, that you don't want it to be arbitrary, capricious. I mean, yeah, that was important to us early on, and we asked for that. And so, and going back to even what Assemblyman Bramnick says about due process, yeah, looking back, clearly the stakeholder process could have been better, and collect information and even work through the legislature too. I mean, which, obviously didn't happen.
One of the questions that I would get after the governor's press conferences is when he gave the numbers was to not overwhelm our healthcare system, which we all totally agree. I have a daughter who's a nurse. She works, in a hospital. I appreciate that. But to Michelle's point, that goalpost kept changing and our members just kept looking for what was that number where they could start planning to reopen. What was the number? Was it spot positivity, rate of transmission, what the contract tracers were finding, the hospitalizations, ventilator use? I mean, all those are important numbers, but it did change. And so there was no reading the tea leaves. And to the point, there is a long runway, that they need to be able to open, especially our wedding and banquet industries. I mean, they need like 4 or 5 months runway. And this is just, it's not happening.
Mary Lou, specifically, because of the industry that you represent and in the interest of full disclosure, you and I have spoken in the past, but what did it do to your members back in July when we were told, hey, we're going to reopen, and then just absolutely, no, we're not reopening now?
That was probably the straw that broke the camel's back for so many of them, because at that point they were gearing up. They had spent money bringing back their employees, buying, PPE, getting their restaurants ready, putting in plexiglass, enhanced ventilation, changing their windows, doing everything they needed to do. And they didn't have money to do it. So many of them were putting on personal credit cards. So that drove so many of our restaurants into personal bankruptcy because they had leveraged their own personal credit cards to do this. So and they said, okay, well, I'm going to be able to open. So, we'll start making money. We'll get our people back. And then that didn't happen. And there was many who just had to declare personal bankruptcy.
And similar to what Assembly Leader Bramnick was asking, did the governor or any of his representatives give your members an explanation as to why they were set to open on a certain date and then just decided, hey, no, we're not opening on that date?
They referenced the numbers, which, again, I didn't understand because I didn't know what numbers we were talking about. So, the fact that he pulled back was disheartening. And what was even more disheartening was when he didn't sign that grant that allowed for our restaurants to recover the money that they lost from the reopening, because many of them, bought perishable foods and, again, bought PPE. PPE you can keep, liquor you can keep, food you can't. So just got donated or thrown away.
That's all I have. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I apologize if I've gone over my time. Thank you.
John, I saw you wave your hand before we call on Assemblyman Thompson. Did you have a?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up, I'm not an attorney, I'm an actuary. So I just want to kind of go over the numbers real quick. And from our analyzation as actuaries, there was no science, ever. The only numbers that I cared about, quite frankly, were in the beginning, the overwhelming of the hospitals, which I understand. But let's just look where we are right now. We got about 3 million folks that have been vaccinated, roughly. And assuming we have 9 million in the state. Hopkins put out a study that said from known cases, you have as many as 6 to 1 that have been unknown in your state. Now, as an actuary, I kind of tone that one back a bit. So let's just say we have 1 for every known case that was asymptomatic. That's 1.5 million plus 3 million that have been vaccinated, at least with 1 shot. That's 4.5. That's half of our state at this point. There was absolutely no excuse for what the governor did to the state in the time frame that he did it, because the math proves it out that this state was under a greater herd immunity than anybody knew, and could have easily opened up sooner than he has at this point. He's never given us And I asked the panel, has he ever given you any of the science that he used to determine these numbers?
No.
They never could explain it to me, and I do this for a living. So thank you for all coming.
Thank you, Senator Thompson. Just real quick for Mary Lou. Today, March 19th, St. Joseph's Day, the governor has acquiesced and now restaurants could open at 50%, correct?
Correct. Yep.
All right. Was that a little bit of a gut punch to a lot of these bars and these pubs that look at St. Patrick's Day 2 days ago as a big day and them doing business even at 50% capacity? Do you think there was much thought, science involved in going from, what was it, 25% to 50% in 2 days? Do you think maybe we could have opened up 2 days sooner at 50% capacity?
Yeah, like he did with the Super Bowl, right? We went from 25% to 35% to 50%. And it's funny you say that because I live in a little community. There's about 300 homes in here. And on St. Patty's Day, I saw cars lined up and down the streets with people having parties. People, on Sunday, people were celebrating St. Patrick's Day. And once again, we're pushing people into private settings rather than celebrating in a safe sanitary environment that my members provide. And like, even when we were talking about the bar seating, you could, if I see my friend Amy Russo, right? Amy and I go to a bar and she and I sit down and you want to have 6 feet between me and the next group, that's fine. That's no different than sitting at a table and you're actually further away from the employee that you're dealing with. So these are the types of things that I was saying that, that are logical that we could have provided information on.
Okay. Well, thank you to this panel, to these witnesses. Hopefully somebody's listening besides us and we can get the state opened a lot quicker. I agree with a lot of the comments that Assemblyman Thompson made because he had the audacity to actually try to apply science and rhyme and reason to some of these executive orders. Okay, next up we have I believe 5 owners of restaurants and bars. I'll announce them all. I will ask you each to try to keep your remarks brief to about 3 minutes because we have a large group right after you also. And then after all of you have said your remarks, then we'll ask if there's any questions from the legislative panel. So up now we have Tanya Calabrese, Amy Russo, Chris Smith, Dominic Rizzo, and Karen Buckingham, all owners of either restaurants or breweries. So welcome. And in no particular order, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're experiencing.
I'll go first.
Go right ahead.
Hi, my name's Amy Russo. I am certainly not a scientist, so let's just get that out of the way. I make pancakes and eggs for a living and love doing so. I am 3rd generation small business entrepreneur in New Jersey and a true Jersey girl I'm proud to be. My grandfather owned one of the first recycling companies in New Jersey. My dad was in warehousing and logistics, eventually restaurants, and here I am. I'll just get into it as quickly as possible and I want to read because if I don't, Lord knows those who know me, I could talk forever. The pandemic was handled very poorly by our governor. I think we can all agree on that. I'm sure I'm going to repeat a lot that has already been said by both Mary Lou and Michelle and some others on the panel. Were we ever heard as an industry? I'll answer that. I have nothing to lose. Absolutely not. We were never heard. We had rallies, in front of restaurants in Seabright back in May. We were basically condemned by our governor for that. Were our rights stripped? My opinion, absolutely. Were we one of the chosen businesses to keep going? Not in the way that we needed to be. And I've heard it said already today, but yes, this has for sure been the death of democracy in our state. Toast is one of the lucky ones. We're still here. We never closed. I stayed open to serve our communities. Often I worked in my locations with myself or just my son and maybe one other person. We did it all. We pivoted, as the buzzword of the spring was. We tried. We did everything. We offered delivery. We did online ordering. We made deals with DoorDash. We stayed open to feed frontline workers in our hospitals, first responders, etc. We worked with Fulfill, they were mentioned earlier, to help the food insecure. We weren't bringing in any dollars, we were funding this ourselves. It hasn't been easy. And for the sake of transparency, I did in sales in April and May what we would have normally done in 1 week. I did that in 2 months. We were down about 90% in second and third quarters of 2020. Was it worth being open? Not exactly, certainly not financially. Am I happy I kept at least a third of my employees getting a paycheck? Absolutely. We don't just run restaurants, we run communities. We say it over and over. So it was really important for me to stay open. But we, the business owner, had to be the one to fund this and now fund our losses. We don't get unemployment, we don't get stimulus checks. Maybe this year we will because we all lost money. But let's just say I haven't seen one yet. I've heard the governor called the Fuhrer, comparing him to the likes of Hitler. Well, I know that's a bit over the top. I can say he has been, in my opinion, unilaterally, it seems, making the decisions and pulling the puppet strings on who can open, what percentages, yada, yada. Again, I don't want to keep repeating what's already been said. The governor's office, in my opinion, should be ashamed of themselves. They've acted like bullies that just a few months before COVID, they were all over condemning. Name calling, belittling business owners that simply were looking for answers, dates, a plan, etc. He called people knuckleheads, statements like whether you like it or not, you can leave, etc. Pretty much saying if you're either on my side or get out of the state. That's how the leader of our state handled this during an emergency. Allegedly, all decisions on reopening were based on one rule, ensuring public health. But the hypocrisy of who could open and who couldn't was alarming. Nope, restaurants supposedly because you had to take off a mask to eat, obviously, that was the reason. But I got on a plane during this pandemic and I was shoulder to shoulder with other people. There were no restrictions on capacity, those same ones that were strangling us. And yet they still fed everybody at the same time. So I'm not exactly sure how that differed from indoor dining. And we talked about the original July 2nd to reopen inside, but then that was pushed to September. Yet the numbers in July, from what I saw, were about the same, if not actually lower than the fall and the winter. So again, I don't know what data we're going for. And now today, I guess because prevailing minds and smarter minds, we're now open at 50%. But let's not forget, we still have a ton of constraints on us. 6-foot distances, etc. Unless you have an extra 1,500 square feet of dining space hanging out, in your backyard, where are we putting those other people? 6 feet, 3 feet, like what is it? I'm a private company, but I still have to follow all these government rules. And if they were the same for everybody, I would probably have less of a problem with it, but they aren't. He's crushed our industry. And for months we've asked to have sit downs, a date, conversations. It never happens. And the trickle down effect is palpable. Not just restaurants are affected when we are kept closed. Think about it. If you're going out to dinner, for example, or going to a wedding, as Mary Lou mentioned, and other events, then retail, nicer clothing stores, all of that, not needed. Gas stations, no one's going anywhere. I have property that I have a gas station on. It's getting clobbered. Florists. Then you look around at all these other states. Could you imagine being in a border town? Pennsylvania, Connecticut, other areas of New York. They can all open, no problem. You just can't. And based on what? There is no goal. The goalpost is a joke. There's no way to plan on any of this. We don't have rules for restaurants with liquor licenses, without liquor licenses. There needs to be a difference. What constitutes bar seating? Are we talking about like sitting there 3 deep and getting hammered, doing shots at a bar? Are we talking about sitting at a counter, eating your meal the same way that you would at a table? Again, Mary Lou had pointed out earlier, you're actually further away. So I don't really get it. I guess that's probably it. I could go on, but I'm going to let the next guy probably say what I forgot.
Thank you, Amy. I know there are some time constraints, and we're going to call on Karen Buckingham to speak next because she has to go someplace, I believe. Karen?
Hi. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody on this committee and personally thank Senator Testa for always being there for me and reaching out to me and making me feel like I matter or my small business matters. I'm the owner of Coho Brewing Company in Cape May Courthouse. I opened my brewery in 2019. I did this for myself because, long story short, I had lost my entire family. I lost my mother and father in the past few years. I lost a brother to suicide years ago, and I lost another brother to drugs. So with that being said, I like being around people. I love being around people. I love hugging. I love touching. I opened my business with that in mind, that people that came into Coho were going to be my family. They were going to be a part of my business. That happened for the first year. For the first year, friendships were made. People walked through my door that I had never met before, and we became family. I miss them. I didn't write anything down here because there's so much. I feel like when somebody said something about a plan, business people have plans. We need plans. We plan for things. I feel like a horse in a starting gate, and that gate hasn't opened for a year. I plan functions. I plan fundraisers, just like Darlene said. I had a coat drive the first year where it was bring a coat, take a coat, no questions asked. If you needed a coat to be warm over the winter, we provided it. We provided book bags. I raised over 500 book bags to be placed. I worked at special services school before this, and I just want to help people. I want to be around people. My main mission, I would say, with opening the brewery was to reach out to people. I support and back our Blue. Everything I do is to support community. I have canine drives to raise money for the canines. I feel like I'm not living anymore. I actually ended up in the hospital. This is me. It's not a pretty picture. Like Darlene said, I used to love life. I used to love going to work. I feel like I'm dying. I feel like I'm slowly dying. I put my house on the line. I'm shaking right now because that's what I do. I cry now, just like Darlene. I feel like we could be best friends because I've always done for others. I feel like I don't have a voice. I feel like I was a child sent to my room for the last year. We spoke about how we're not given our voice. We don't have our voice anymore. Could you imagine sending your child to their room for a year and not hearing what they may have to say about what's going on? And also that child, what are they thinking for that year? What's going on in their head? I have high blood pressure now. I've gained weight. I have stress issues. I try to hold it all together because for those people that are allowed to walk through my door right now, like I said, they're my family. I do it for them. I appreciate what you guys are doing for us. I hope one day we can get back to some sort of normal, whatever that is. We can all enjoy life, but this shutdown is killing people. Believe me, COVID is real. I know it's real. I feel sorry for those people that aren't able to hug their loved ones again. I take it serious. I'm a mother and a grandmother. I keep my place clean, but yet right across the street, Home Depot, people are lined up to go in. There's no personal business owner standing there at the door greeting someone, you know, to make sure they're okay or how their family is at home or knows them personally. It's not fair. It's frustrating. It's killing so many of us, not just me, because no matter how bad I have it one day, I know there's somebody out there who has it worse. I could say a million other things that you've probably heard. I could go on forever, but I think Darlene covered everything. It's hard. It's hard. And one day at a time. I take one day at a time. And I appreciate this time to be heard. And I thank everybody on the committee. Any questions?
Thank
you.
We're going to go to Tanya next. Tanya, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi.
You're up.
I just want to say thank you to everybody for putting this together. It is really just amazing just being able to speak, like you were just saying, Karen, you know, not having the opportunity to voice anything or get anything done as a business owner who is in charge of getting things done in their own business has been extremely frustrating. So my husband and I own Netties in Tinton Falls. We've been open about 2 years now. And, you know, as everyone said, and everyone knows, this has all been extremely frustrating. It has not been handled properly. Right now, my biggest concern is just that from day one, we've been following all of the rules. all the rules. We did everything that we could to make indoor dining safe. We got a UV light filter, we got new fans, we installed new windows in the whole building because it was so old that they wouldn't open, and we wanted fresh air and ventilation. Recently, we were visited by the ABC because we put high top tables up against our bar, and the ABC said, you can't do that. I know personally in Monmouth County and probably all around the state, every restaurant with a bar is doing exactly this. They have high top tables up against their bar. The ABC told me, you can't do that anymore. And I said, well, what about barriers? I just ordered the barriers to put up at the bar. Can I use those? No, your tables have to be 6 feet away from the bar. And I said, okay, well, we have, he was standing there with me saying, you don't have 6 feet, so you can't use those tables at all. Now, today, we're at 50% capacity and we can't seat 50% because I don't have 6 feet to move these tables anywhere. So we're still at, 45% without these few bar tables. And that is the most frustrating thing in the world. I have been reaching out for 2 weeks trying to get a hold of someone at the ABC to clarify. And I've been told that they are not able to interpret the rules that were written. And, it's just not fair because we're allowed to put a barrier in between two tables that are closer than 6 feet apart. But why can't we do that? Why can't I put a barrier in between a table and the bar if I don't have 6 feet? None of the rules that are given to us make sense. And we want reasons. As business owners, we want reasons why we can't do these things that are safe and logical. So in the past 2 weeks, I've had to reduce my bartenders' schedules immensely. And so it's affecting their pockets as well as ours, of course, but it's just been, it's frustrating to want to do the right thing and be told, oh, sorry, I actually had someone yesterday at the ABC tell me to hang tight. And I almost lost it. So that's what I have for you. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tanya. Chris Smith, and then we'll follow with Dominic Rizzo.
Thank you, Senator Panaccio. Thank you, Senator O'Scanlan, for including me in this. I appreciate it. And thank you for everybody who is taking part in this testimony today. I appreciate that. Yeah, Tanya has a great point, which is that, one of the questions I wanted to address was the safety guidance confusing? And the question is, the answer is absolutely. 25% capacity in the beginning. Well, was that the capacity of the seats and tables that you have in your restaurant currently, or is it the capacity of the maximum occupancy of your restaurant? Was it the 10 p.m. curfew? Just never made any sense to anybody. If you're putting all these rules in place for people, if I'm not going to have people sitting at a bar, if I'm just sitting people down at a table and having them eat, what's the matter if it's 10 or 10 after 10? All that did was cause business loss for things like, the Super Bowl or the college football playoffs where you're sending people home at halftime and you're just losing money. There's no sense. There's no reason. Obviously, they made some very broad, draconian decisions. It's policy by fiat. It was discussed as it was discussed before. A lot of the restrictions and mandates seem to be aimed at preventing young adults from going out and drinking at bars. Now, that's not Tanya's place, and that's not Amy's place, and frankly, it's not my place or Karen's place. We're talking about like the kids that are 2 or 3 deep at certain summer bars. I understand that doesn't create a good visual for what the governor was trying to prevent and what he's trying to do. But the fact of the matter is, you can safely sit 2 or 3 people at a bar, separate them by 6 feet, sit 2 or 3 more people at a bar. This is what's happening in other states. So my brother James and I own Val's Tavern in Rumson, New Jersey. I have another brother who owns a place in Warwick, New York called Halligan's. Halligan's has been open for 50% occupancy for the last 8 months. So a lot of people think like, well, New York is the strictest state. It's not. New Jersey is. New York City was particularly strict because they weren't allowing inside dining. But meanwhile, the outside dining that they had in New York City with these lean-tos and all these things it was a joke. They're putting up like these plywood lean-tos and people are eating them, considering it outside dining. It was much less safe than the indoor dining that we're providing. So my brother's at 50% dining for the last 8 months. We're at 25%. He feels sorry for us. New York feels sorry for New Jersey. Connecticut's 100% now. Maryland's 100% now. New Hampshire's 100%. Pennsylvania is 75%. We're the ones that are lagging, and we're 50% today. It's really frightening. I don't want to. I have a little bit of time. I want to be positive. We haven't had a direct line to the governor, but Declan has been terrific. Serena Damaso's been terrific. Vin Gopal has been terrific. They've listened to us and they've tried to get our voices heard. I'm going to give you guys something. It's just a seed that I want to plant now. The one thing the governor can do for us is to help our industry moving forward is to speak to individual towns about keeping the expanded opportunities for outdoor dining permanent. The extension of business premise, which has allowed a framework for municipalities to allow restaurants to utilize outdoor space for sidewalks, parking, public space, parking lots, public spaces. We should work to make that permanent. Allow businesses. It's been a great boon for businesses that have had to be creative and figure out different ways to serve people. It turns out that people really like eating outdoors, especially when the weather permits. We've done it. We've set it up in our parking lot. I would love to continue to do it, not just this year, which the governor's already done with the extension of the legislation, but I want to be able to do it permanently. I want to be able to go to my town and say, hey, listen, when the weather's nice, I want to set up a beer garden type or some park-like area where my parking lot was. You're going to lose 4 or 5 parking spots, but as the last 2 years will dictate to you, that's not the end of the world because we've been doing it for the last 2 summers. So it's an innovative way to help the state's restaurant businesses to make back some of the money that they've lost. And we know that moving forward, it's still the safest way to dine, which is to dine outdoors. And people have joined, and people in general, I think, have enjoyed the summer expansions. So that's it. I have all this stuff like the 15%, the $15 minimum wage hike. I think that's a mistake for the restaurant business, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Rounding off the panel is Dominic Rizzo. Mr. Rizzo, can you hear us? No video, Mr. Rizzo? I guess not. Okay, if he comes,
You're on mute. If you are talking, Mr. Rizzo, you're on mute.
okay, we may come back to Mr. Rizzo, but at least let's give the legislative panel a chance to ask questions. Senator O'Scanlan, do you have any questions?
Thanks, Senator Panaccio. I'll be quick because this panel did a great job giving real world, putting real faces and experiences to the theoretical discussions that we had all morning. I really appreciate it. I've been to every single one of these establishments, save the brewery, but Senator Testa has told me that he's going to bring me down there this summer. So looking forward to it. We hear you guys loud and clear. Tanya, Nettie's is a fabulous restaurant. Everybody on this call should get there at some point soon, like all the rest of these establishments. But regarding your issue, Tanya, with the bar seating, you're absolutely right. It absolutely makes no sense. And I heard through a couple other folks your particular experience, and we've been on with folks at the ABC trying to get clarification. It's 2 weeks now, and the fact that we haven't is incredible to me. This should not be a hard call for someone to make, because you absolutely were right. It doesn't make sense to prohibit things that are reasonable and safe without an explanation. And by the way, things that everybody else is doing. Within a couple of days of hearing your story, I traveled to 4 or 5 establishments and took pictures where they are doing all of these things that you're saying you're being prohibited from doing. So it's random where the ABC shows up or where they don't, or it's contradictory. There's some places that have been told by the ABC it's okay to do these things. So it's a huge and horrific mixed message. I want you to know we're working hard to try to get that clarity. So thank you for being here. Thank you for making the investments and letting us know how much you've invested to try to meet the rules. And that's a theme of all of you. It has been that you're doing all you can. You're not thumbing your nose at the guidance. You're not protesting and breaking the rules. You're really desperately trying to work within the rules and the bounds of healthy policy. So With that, again, Chris, thank you. Dominic, I know you were on for a while, so that you didn't get to speak yet. Amy, love your place toast as well. You all were really articulate, and we're going to work hard to do the things you've asked us to do today.
Hello.
Thank you. Is that Dominic?
Yo.
Oh. Can
you hear me?
You're up, Dominic.
Well, gee, apparently I'm not the most technological person. I apologize.
All right.
The floor is yours, Dominic. You got a couple minutes.
All right. Yeah. No. I wanted, again, everybody kind of touched on everything that I would say as well. And Chris, you had a great point about the towns keeping up their, the new rules about liquor and the outdoor dining, I think, which is huge. And for the first assemblyman that spoke, he said, do you have the opportunity to be heard? And I feel like we did have the opportunity to be heard, but we never got the opportunity to be answered. I asked, Senator O'Scanlan and Vin Gopal and everyone down from police chiefs to police officers to state police, and nobody really had the answers of what we were allowed to do, what we were not allowed to do, and how far we could push the bill. And it really kind of impeded on all of our business. The summer was great. We had to give it all back as soon as the weather turned and the 10 o'clock curfew came in with no bar. So he said we were at 25%, and literally we were at maybe 5% with what we were actually allowed to seat and do business-wise, especially in my establishment. The best thing that I've had through this whole thing was Senator O'Scanlan and everybody on that restaurant group chain that I believe most of the people on this call were on. We could try to figure it out, day by day, and with the ambiguity of the ABC, trying to figure out what we were allowed to do and what we weren't allowed to do. The last thing that I have, the tough time dealing with now is with the unemployment and the new stimulus and the unemployment extension till September. It's hard to get people to just want to work. I've spent a lot of money out of pocket, carrying people over the summer, carrying people over their whole COVID, to just get pushed off now because of the unemployment. And that's really kind of tough. And it takes the hospitality out of the hospitality industry. Sorry to be quick and fast, but that's my comments on the whole thing.
You don't have to apologize for being quick and fast, not when we're several hours into this. So, Dominic, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator.
Catch 19, which you should mention there on Broad Street in Red Bank. Look forward to seeing you soon. I think what you said has been said, so I'll defer to other members for questions now. Senator Panaccio.
Senator Crowder, do you have a question? No. Senator Testa? Any other members have a question? I have one for Chris. Chris, you had mentioned Connecticut is at 100%, you said, restaurants?
I think they announced that they're going to 100% recently, yes. In fact, that was before Governor Murphy announced he was going from 35 to 50.
The reason that's disturbing to me is because initially when this whole pandemic started, the governors of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey had formed a regional approach, bragging about having a regional approach to this. And yet last week we've learned that, last time we learned that Connecticut did not have the same deadly healthcare directive that forced nursing homes to take those patients. And today we're learning that even though it was a regional approach, you have Connecticut, which has the directive now to open up restaurants, if not now, soon, to 100%, and New Jersey at best, maybe 50%. What do they know in Connecticut that we don't know here?
Yeah, the approach has been, it's been so different state by state, and it's very frustrating to watch because it seems as though we lag all the states in terms of, the delicate balance of saving lives versus, economics, saving the economy. And I get it. I mean, none of us here minimize the issues involving the pandemic. It's obviously taken the lives of people that we all know. It's a horrible thing, but there obviously, as a politician, you're forced into that difficult decision, which is balancing the economy versus the health risk. I mean, it's a tough spot, but we seem to be lagging everyone else in terms of protecting the economy.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you to this panel. The hour is getting late, so we're going to thank you. We're going to move on to the final panel. And again, I asked the legislators just to hold off their questions until we've given each of those members of those panel 3 minutes to please tell us what's on their mind. Up next are Vinnie Brand, Michael Seitel, Jeff Mortman, and Pat Villaroli. I know I butchered that name. I'm used to butchering names all my life. These are not restaurants, I understand. These are other types of businesses, gyms and things like that. Please let us know how these decisions of this administration, this COVID response, how it affected you. So we'll start, I guess we'll start with the way that I announced them. Mr. Brand, Vinny, you want to go first? Vinny, are you on? Vinny, you gotta unmute yourself.
Believe me, I'm better muted. I want to start off by saying, I wake up every day grateful that my business and my home is not in New York. And I want to thank everyone for letting me be here. I also want to start out with something that may get me thrown off the meeting. I want to thank the governor for what he's done during this last year. I am fully aware that there have been mistakes and hardships that every one of us in our industry have faced. I would be remiss if I didn't say that he got some things right. And it's been a most difficult time to govern, and I'm aware of that. I think mistakes are part of leadership. I think we've all made them. And I think now it's important that we learn from those mistakes and move forward. The damage done to our business is significant. My wife and I built this business literally from nothing. I lived in a boarding home when I opened my business. My wife joined me 2 years later. We built it into a nationally recognized and well-respected comedy powerhouse. We've hosted performances from Chris Rock, Ray Romano, Kevin James. Virtually every major national comic in the country has worked and still works at our club in New Brunswick, New Jersey. At the beginning, we worked 20-hour days every day. And that was part of building our business, and we understood that. By the beginning of 2020, we had opened our second club. We were going into our third year with our second club, and we had just purchased a restaurant. We were employing north of 50 full-time employees. Those employees enjoyed full paid health benefits, 401k, vacation packages. We were a significantly forward-thinking comedy club, and we made a career path for our key employees. By March of 2020, of course, the wheels come off. And since that time, we have pared our full-time employees by more than 2/3. Our health insurance package has gone away completely. It's just not something we can maintain. And through what I will call an enormous effort made by our staff and my wife and I, we were able to transform our business in New Brunswick and keep it afloat. At the beginning of 2020, having just purchased a restaurant next to our business in Connecticut, we were essentially debt-free. We had a $25,000 line of credit. Everything else was paid for. In March of 2021, we are $500,000 in debt to EIDL loans, PPP loans that, because of restrictions, were not usable in a fashion that made them forgivable. In Connecticut, we have to pay back more than 70% of our PPP lifeline, which is just absolutely unacceptable as a private business person to have to go through that. We all understood the need to flatten the curve, and we understood how difficult it was. So we're not in that mode right now where we want to look backward and point out what a year later looked like obvious mistakes. I think for us, the important part of where we are now is how do we go from here and rebuild our business? And how do we get that done in an environment where maybe our voices aren't being heard as efficiently or thoroughly as we need to have them heard? For me, I look at some of the restrictions in New Jersey, we finally lifted our 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock curfew. That curfew is still in existence in Connecticut, and New York is still a mess. So again, I want to say the governor has gotten some things right. We need to get more right. That is really where we are. From us, from a restaurant standpoint, we look at the airline industry, and if you take a flight on United, you know that you are going to sit literally 2.34 inches away from another human being. And you're going to sit in an aluminum tube for 6 hours as you travel across the country. And it seems odd to think that they somehow made that safe, and yet serving chicken fingers in New Brunswick is a death-defying feat. So we need to find a way to utilize these or to build on best practices and open up our businesses significantly. What we're looking for at the Stress Factory is we're looking to have a seat at the table so that we can help. It is very, very difficult to be told that you're non-essential. It didn't affect me. I've been married for 24 years. I've been non-essential for 22 of them. But the point I'm making is to be told that you're non-essential and that you cannot work and that you're simultaneously going to become your child's teacher. You're going to simultaneously lay off people that you've worked with for 17 years. You're simultaneously going to liquidate assets that were meant to take care of you or to provide your life in a retirement environment. To have all that happen without a significant voice at the table is very, very damaging. The people in our industry, and our industry, hospitality, let's face it, it includes the New York Giants, the Yankees, hotels, comedy clubs, restaurants. Listen, we have been almost singly affected more than any other industry. And the negative impact is incredible. What I'm looking for now from the state is a better plan rather than a broad brush. We should be looking for more individualized opening scenarios. We built a gigantic tent in New Brunswick. Not everybody could do that. My business shouldn't be treated the same way every other business is treated. And inside our club, we're in a very small environment. If I didn't have the tent, I would tell you that maybe we need more restriction, or we need guidance on what can help us open. What is United Airlines doing that they can allow people to sit so close and pack an airplane safely? What are they doing in other states that works? Let's find out, and let's make it something we're doing here in New Jersey, all right? Our best practices need to be shared. And in order to do that, we need to have a voice. In New Brunswick, we did things that were not mandated that worked for us. Why can't we share that information? Other restaurants have done things I am certain that would improve our practices, but we don't have a way of sharing that and no guidance from up top to help us get that done. Why aren't we developing air filtration systems? I look at this environment we're in, and I'm asking for all leaders on both sides of the aisle to help us from here forward. We need to not only get open during this pandemic, but we should be building practices and practices that help us with the next pandemic. Look, our numbers are good in New Jersey, but they're significantly serious. They're still significantly serious. We've got to learn how to live with this virus and work with this virus. There's only so much stimulus before that can't happen anymore, or before it doesn't work anymore. So what are we doing to prepare not only to get back to work now, but to live with this virus and to live with the next pandemic? I don't want to go through this again. And there's no reason to believe that we won't have to go through this again. I listened to everybody talk today, and I said to myself, boy, they started with brilliant lawyers, brilliant scientists. They started with more articulate business owners, and then they went to me. I think it's a mistake in how we lined up the queue. But that being said, I want other things to occur now, and those things involve collaboration. Lawyers are going to move things through the court. That's valuable. It's necessary. Politicians are going to debate who's right, their party, the other party, all of that. while all of that is grinding its way into the history books, real businesses and real people are hurting and dying. So we need to stop for a moment and take and look forward. I want a true collaboration, and that involves everybody.
You have more to say, Eddie, but we're gonna, I know Assemblyman Bramnick has some questions for you, so we'll save any other comments that you have because the hour is getting late. So I butchered Pat's name. So Pat, we're gonna give you the opportunity to tell me exactly how your last name is pronounced, and you're up next, please.
Are you asking me to wrap it up quickly?
I'm asking you to just wait there and save any other testimony for when Assemblyman Bramnick asks you a question. Pat, can you hear? You're up, Pat. Okay, why don't we skip Pat? We'll go to Mike next. Michael?
Okay. My story is a little bit different than everyone here. My name is Mike Seitel. I'm a manufacturer from Morris County. Senator Bucco has been to our place numerous times. But really the point I want to make is that as family businesses, employees are everything to us. What we do is we do everything to keep them safe, support their families, and in turn, they'll go and do everything for you. And I just want to go over a few events that happened this year just to show the give and take between them. Like in February when COVID hit, we had our management team already get together and we already started a plan because no one's telling us anything, right? The government didn't tell us anything. We started with, simple things, no travel on airlines, getting rid of shared coffee pots. That was probably the worst thing that for me to do. It was hard. And, but, we got computers bought, we checked on more complex things like what happens with our health insurance for employees. And these are all questions. No one's helping us. And, and one big thing is having your employees feel secure. So that's the biggest thing we strove for the whole thing is keeping them feeling comfortable and not worried about losing their jobs. By mid-March, there still was no government shutdown. We actually had our employees all wearing face shields. We took our 3D printers, converted them to making face shields for us first. Then we went to the hospitals and started donating them and all that. But like we did everything, we had sanitizing stations everywhere. You almost trip over it. Don't tell OSHA, but they were everywhere. We split into shifts, night shift, day shift, everything to keep us apart. We added Lexan screens or plexiglass screens for the rest of you, between everyone, because we could build that stuff. And then, we even I got these on, we have contact tracing fobs we all wear, and it's quite an expense. To date, just on safety measures, I think we've spent, they told me, about $130,000 in the last 9 months on safety measures between what we've done, the contact tracers. And this is all things little companies do. The big boys, we have big Fortune 500 manufacturers come in to look at our equipment. They're amazed at what we do compared to what they do. And yeah, I think a lot doesn't give credit to all these businesses on here on how they would protect their employees. And then just to give you a bit story, I'm not going to go too long. The workload during this was going to shit, right? It just went down. We were struggling. We rebuilt bathrooms. We made our employees build conference rooms for keeping us separate. We had them put in new flooring in hallways, whatever we could. And, and then like a miracle almost happened is we got contacted by a healthcare firm to build the rapid test kit automation that the president at the time, Trump, was showing on TV. It was like, okay, we could do that. And then they gave us the thing, here's what you got to do. You got 24 hours to come up with a way to do it, come up with a machine that can produce test kits at 350 a minute. And you have to build it in 12 weeks. And we're like, 12 weeks? It's just crazy. a normal build like that, just to give you guys an idea, it takes about 10, 12 weeks of engineering, 8 weeks to fabricate the parts, and then about the rest is assembly time, wiring, troubleshooting. It's about a 45-week build in normal times. So, and we had to do this in COVID. So we immediately we contacted people and programmers in Boston, vibratory bowl builders in Indiana, machine shops in Michigan, all over the state, or the country, we're calling people in. And then we got them, our employees, on a big Teams meeting. And we're like, listen, here's what we got. We could say no, but we got a chance to help the country. And we're going to be working 7 days a week, probably 12 to 15 hours a day for most of us. And, you know, the amazing thing is every employee, every subcontractor, everyone's like, yes, let's do it, right? It's not a question. What your employees give to you, and that's what you find in all these businesses that are here, is they take care of their employees, and the employees, they give back just as much. And I think a lot of in conclusion, what I have to say is, and a lot of what Vincent said, we can learn from this. There's a lot to be learned. What are we going to do in the future when this happens again? Right now, I feel that the state only looks at the big boys, you know, the big pharma companies that they give tax credits to and other things. But what we really need to do is get a group of us together. When something happens, you need to get people from each sector, a guy that owns a gym, someone that owns a restaurant. We're going to keep our people safe. That's what we do. We all do that. And because they're our bread and butter, we don't have any assets. The buildings are nothing. It's our people are everything. And we're going to do what we can to keep them safe. And I think government, you guys got to take this as a learning opportunity, get us together in the future and use our knowledge to make this a better outcome for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Pat, are you with us now?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, go right ahead. Pronounce your last name because I know I butchered it, Pat, please.
Yes, my name is Patricio Villarroel, Villarroel.
Welcome.
I own a tuxedo, dry cleaning, and alteration business. And thank you for inviting me to speak with you guys today, because we are having some problems economically, because due to COVID-19, since the COVID starts, we have to let go 5 employees since then. We used to be 11, now we're only 5. And sometimes 1 part-time. Business was very slow, very, very slow, to consider the point of many times closing it. And it's due because people are living at home and working at home, and they don't bring anything to our stores. Dry cleaning business went down close to 60%. Tuxedo business went completely down since February of last year, 2020, close to 0. And alterations, it moves a little bit more, 40%. That's what it keeps us running, because people need very little things, but there are a lot of them. So it keeps us a little bit alive. Besides that, we do have a loan from the state, which we appreciate a lot, because that one really keeps us going. Also, some grants that we get from the state, which is absolutely wonderful, because that's the way that we are here now. Otherwise, we couldn't make it. We would be closed about 6 months ago. We are here almost 41 years. And this is a very hard time for us. And what we ask to the state is if they can give us a little more of grants to keep going, because this, whatever they give us till now, is already gone, because our businesses not doing very well. So this is the way that I'm asking for that. And it's not only us, it's a lot of cleaners that I know that they close nearby. And also tuxedos are completely out. A few of them, I'm the only left in this area. Because of that, because we try to keep alive the most we can do. In dry cleaners, we have 3 hospitals around that we help a lot with their clothing, and so is anti-alteration, and we are essential to the area. So that's why we asking if you can consider to do a little more grants later on.
Thank you. Jeff, thank you very much. Jeff, you rounded off for us. Can you hear us, Jeff?
I can. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Go right ahead.
Go. Wow, you certainly did not save the best for last, that's for sure. First off, thank you very much for hosting this, having this. Senator Corrado, thank you for always being there for us and everybody in your district. This has been very interesting. I didn't know what to expect with this. It's been an interesting 3 hours. I've heard some amazing speakers. I've really, my heart goes out to so many people, Darlene and Karen and so many others that really, really took it on, took a bad hit. Thousands and tens of thousands of us have. I own Gold's Gym in Totowa, New Jersey. I'm a Marine my entire life, and my wife and I have rebuilt our gym 3 years ago when we purchased it. And one of the biggest things for us that, we like everybody, March 16th last year, the end of life, we had to close our gym, our home, and we had thousands of members, and every member would either call, email, contact us right from day one saying, we're going to see you in 2 weeks. This is a 2-week closure. And 2 weeks obviously went very fast. We have a huge contingent of what we dub as our heroes in our area: police, fire, military, EMT, doctors, nurses. It's probably our largest segment of our member base. And the big issue of essential versus non-essential during this really it's just amazing to me who comes up with some of these decisions. How a gym and a health club cannot be considered essential, but the bar down the street or certain other industries were, is just shocking to me. There was a mental health aspect of this that is still going on. It's so strong. There were so many people. I have members now that we're open 6 months later that still cry to me on a daily basis of how this was their saving grace, aside from the physical, but the mental aspect of it. So to take that away from them during this, especially our heroes that needed it probably more than everybody else, that were on the front lines and that they couldn't have a place to decompress stress-free. We did everything just like everybody else. I thought that I was one of one, that I was the only one that did it all right from the day one. By April 1st, we had already started implementing protocols. By May 1st, I had AI technology in here. I already had my heating and air conditioning systems upgraded. We had plexiglass. We had moved all our pieces of equipment around to allow for 6 foot social distance. We did everything. And it got us nowhere. The goalposts just kept getting moved. Every time the governor said, okay, state, we're going to get to here, then we're going to get to open this. That just never happened. It just kept getting pushed. And that's been discussed all day today. You know, that's something that I would love to get answers on. But, you know, I am thankful. I am happy that it only took us a year to get to 50% today, coincidentally. My industry particularly, you know, it's my industry. I know others have been hit equally, if not worse, but we feel like we really got kicked in the backside. We lost income for that we will never recover from. Our memberships are down by 40% on an average. Our revenue is down 30 to 40% on average. Our expenses are up 15% on average. And it's coming only out of the owner's pockets. You know, we're small business. I thought what Mike made a comment on and others did as well. Home Depot, Costco, they did a wonderful job of putting a person in the front door with a little clicker just counting you in. But that didn't cut it. That didn't do anything like every single small business did in America to make it safe. I'm a big advocate for all businesses, not just mine. But there is a Jim's Care Act that is out, and we'd love support for our particular industry. But I really want to thank you all for putting this together. It's been enlightening. And again, to everybody, thank you. Senator Corrado in particular, thank you so much for inviting me and our Jim into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and all the witnesses. I'm just going to skip over Senator Scanlon just one time because I want to defer to the Minority Leader, Assemblyman Ramnick. I understand you have some questions.
Yeah, thank you. This is to Vinnie Brand, who's both a comedian, business owner, and club owner. You were very bipartisan, and I appreciate that. And I know you're personal friends with Governor Murphy, and I think Governor Murphy's a fun guy to be personal friends with. But what you said was, it's time to move forward. So you wouldn't object to having the opportunity to speak directly before the only decision maker in this state. Remember, the only person making decisions as to whether or not someone can sit 2 inches away from each other or 6 feet is Governor Murphy. So you wouldn't have an objection if he had a hearing where people such as yourself, who are now debt of $500,000, so you could be heard. You'd agree with that, Vinnie, would you not?
I would, and I think not only would I welcome the opportunity, I don't think we can move forward without that happening. Well, because private industry and private citizenry is what puts all of you in office. If our voices aren't heard, this is not the democracy that we propose to be.
Well, that's exactly my point. You're talking about you're willing to forgive the past if their mistakes were made. But are you unwilling to continue to have a democracy where you don't have an opportunity to be heard before the person making the decisions? So I would, and hopefully join with other members of this panel and people in the state of New Jersey to have that opportunity. And I hope that the governor does that and hears from somebody like Vinnie Brand. One last quick question. How are the entertainers doing? And keep it brief because Senator Panaccio, you know, we have to move forward on this. But my question is, have you heard about the suffering from the people who entertain at your club who lived really week to week?
Absolutely. And the entertainers are being crushed, literally crushed. There is no safety net for them of significance. And, you know, big entertainers are able to weather the storm. If you're Ray Romano, you've hopefully got a couple dollars put away. But a guy coming up or a girl coming up right now, or someone who's been making their trade from cruise ships to comedy clubs, they are literally being destroyed. So it's not an exaggeration.
Hopefully we will hear soon that the majority members of the legislature or the governor will begin to allow people to speak directly to the quote decision maker. Thank you, Vinnie. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Scanlon.
Thanks, Senator Panaccio, and thank you, our last presenters. really everything that needs to be said has been said. There's been a constant drumbeat of every single person we've heard from here about moving goalposts, about your desperate attempts to meet the governor's commands and the governor's pronouncements and meet the state restrictions, only to have the rug pulled out from under you. We feel for you, we hear you, and hopefully the administration will hear you as well. So thanks again for all of you being here.
Thank you, Senator O'Scanlan. Senator Crowder, do you have a question? Would you like to welcome your
I
guest?
have a question. I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today. It was really important that we heard their stories. We all know that the small businesses, especially our mom and pops on Main Street throughout New Jersey, are the backbone of our economy, and they have been decimated during this pandemic. Due to the governor's shutdown, the small businesses and their employees have been disproportionately suffered from unchecked government control and mandates. And the governor's draconian lockdown decisions, which did decimate our small businesses, 3 out of 10 are gone and not coming back. But he allowed the big businesses to thrive. They remained open and are more successful than ever. And I think one of the things that we heard time and time again from all of the witnesses is the unfortunate lack of clarity. They're struggling to do the right thing and can never get answers from anyone in the administration. It's also ironic that the exact same people from the governor on down who are looking to keep small businesses closed have never missed a single paycheck during the pandemic. I'm a proud small business owner. And so for me, listening, I really wanted to hear the stories that were told today. And in a strange way, I felt a sense of relief because they were telling my story. I can relate to every single one of them. I own a business with my dad. I sign the paychecks for our employees, the paychecks that keep them in their homes with a roof over their head and put, food on the table for their families. And I have spent those sleepless nights, the anxiety, the tears. Am I going to have a business when this pandemic is over? Or am I going to have a business when we're allowed to open up again? I understand the financial and the personal sacrifices you make to open a business and to maintain a business and to be not just a business, but part of the community. And Governor Murphy does not understand that. It's clear from the decisions that he's been making. And what's even more clear is the lack of input from the business owners. We are well past the time to open up businesses 100% in the state of New Jersey. Our business owners are incredibly smart. They know what to do. They know the right thing to do. It is time for Governor Murphy and his administration to listen to our business owners and let them open up. So thank you to everyone that was part of this today. It was really important to hear your stories.
Thank you, Senator Crowder. Senator Testa?
Thank you so much, Senator. I just want to thank each and every one of the business owners that has really, appeared here and told their story. And it is the story of all of the small business owners in the state of New Jersey who were deemed non-essential. And I want to be very clear about this. All of the businesses in the Garden State are essential. It should never be up to the governor of New Jersey to rule the state of New Jersey by executive fiat and executive order for a year. The first 60 days or so of the novel coronavirus, when this was new, we didn't know what this virus was going to do. However, that doesn't mean we get to put the Constitution and the Bill of Rights on hold. Our governor has specifically stated that the Bill of Rights was above his pay grade. Well, I can tell you, for all the senators and the assemblymen that are on this call today, it is not above our pay grade. We've done everything that we can to try and preserve your rights. And we thank you for appearing. We're sorry that we could not do more. The governor knows what his powers are, and he has exercised those powers to the fullest. And hopefully that there is light at the end of this tunnel. I thank you for your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Testa. Senator Bucco?
Thank you, Senator Panaccio. To all of the panelists, thank you for your testimony and your insight. Whenever Trenton believes that it knows better than those that are dealing with the problems on the ground, bad things happen. And when Trenton is represented by just one, rather than the entire legislature, that problem becomes even worse because it's only what that person experiences rather than the experience of every legislator that can touch the folks in their individual districts. And that's what we've witnessed now. There's been a lack of transparency. There's been a lack of communications. There's been a lack of clarity. The missteps at every level are shown through the testimony that we took today. And it's a shame because while there's no playbook for how to deal with COVID-19, there certainly has proven to be, as we look back, there could have been a better approach, and an approach that saved businesses, that saved families' dreams and hopes, and allowed people to continue to live their lives safely, even in spite of the pandemic. So I think today's discussion was very helpful. I think we need to have more of it. It's a shame that we couldn't have had it on a bipartisan basis. And hopefully we can do that going forward because the more that we work together, the better off the state will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gluck. Assemblyman Thompson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank everybody that's been on the panel and come before us. And this story has to be told again and again to the governor. And the math doesn't lie. We are at a point that 75 days ago when we began and really ramped up the vaccine, we have now gotten to the point that we have half of the state that either has seen this virus and in terms of herd immunity, been cured of the virus, or has been vaccinated. There is absolutely no reason in the world that this state can't be open at 100%. It's just simple arithmetic. You don't have to be a scientist to figure this out. As a mathematician, I do it all day long, and now is the time. We're far beyond the point that we really need to be shut down like this. And I hope that this message gets to the governor, and we'll try to bring it to him every time we can. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Well, just a brief closing remark from myself, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses, and I'd like to thank the legislative panel for their participation. Once again, I would like to thank and encourage all those who participated, but I also am encouraging our Democrat majority to do the right thing. Join us, form that promised committee, give us subpoena power. Too many businesses were destroyed. Too many people died. Let's put the same effort of investigating what happened during the pandemic as we did with Bridgegate. Any less effort would be an abdication of our responsibility. I would like to think that our efforts are putting a spotlight on these issues and how they were handled. I would like to also think that these public forums give voice and courage to others who can add to our discourse and provide vital information to the public. Since our last meeting on nursing homes, a tape surfaced that showed the administration was warned that nursing home COVID policy would cause people to die. We cannot afford to continue having people die and businesses fail. In the words of Thomas Jefferson, the best disinfectant for government is sunshine. I apologize for all the pain this government has caused our business community. I am sorry that they were not clear and did not supply the science and data that was due you for the pain that was inflicted upon you. And I am sorry for the lack of legislative oversight. You were let down. Are there any other remarks by any other legislators? Thank you all very, very much. God bless you all. Have a safe day, safe weekend. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.